Chapter 390. The investigation of the Ministry of Revenue made great progress. The officials of the three departments pressed forward step by step. Seeing that they were digging deeper and deeper, the Crown Prince's expression became more and more boastful. Occasionally, he would reveal a few sighs in his conversation with the scholar. It was unknown whether he was sighing about the purge the Ministry of Revenue was about to face or the increasingly heavy spring. The description of a rolling snowball was very appropriate. In Tsangzhou, where there was year-round snow in the north, the winter jackets worn by the tens of thousands of soldiers did not bring much cement to the Ministry of Revenue. Starting from this, they searched toward the capital and dug up a few more stories from the past. All of the clues were gathered at the Ministry of Revenue in Jingdou. The deficit in the discovered accounts grew larger and larger. The wound of the Qing kingdom that had been carefully hidden by the Ministry of Revenue officials was bloodily torn open and displayed for the officials to admire. After the investigation group entered the palace to make a report, they increased the strength of the investigation. Even the scholar knew that the Ministry of Revenue could no longer be protected. If Fan Jian quickly resigned at this time, the court might give the Fan Manor some face for Fan Xian's sake. If they continued to confront each other like this, it would not be as simple as Fan Jian being stripped of his position. Although the scholar and the civil officials were also fearful of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit, they did not want the court to make too much of a ruckus. They also did not want the temporarily balanced court to tilt. Thus, through some channels, they conveyed goodwill to the Fan Manor. As long as Minister Fan asked to resign, the scholar and Shu the scholar were willing to jointly guarantee his safety. However, this was only the official's wishful thinking. For an old official like Fan Jian, who had followed the emperor for nearly 30 years, once he made up his mind, the response he made was extremely stubborn. The Fan Manor expressed gratitude for the goodwill secretly conveyed by the various manors. As for the goodwill itself, Fan Jian himself still did not give a concrete response. He did not enter the palace to cry bitterly to the emperor. He also did not send a letter to ask for his resignation. In fact, he was still sick. His condition did not seem to be improving. All the officials knew that Minister Fan was not sick, and so did the palace. But this time, the emperor did not send the royal doctor or eunuch Hong to Fan Manor to see him. Perhaps the palace also knew that they had wronged the Fan family, and so they tolerated Fan Jian's act of using his illness as an excuse to complain. For the next few days, the Crown Prince sat in the Ministry of Revenue and stared at the people below him investigating cases. This time, the scholar also had to personally come to watch. The people investigating and the people being investigated were all having a hard time. On this day, there was another breakthrough in the investigation of the Ministry of Revenue. The amount of silver in the accounts did not match the amount in the treasury. The enormous deficit pointed in 4 different directions to 4 unremarkable officials. Finally, he found the specific executor and the specific matter of the deficit. When the Crown Prince heard the report, his eyes lit up, but his expression was incomparably calm. He thought to himself, if I dig up from those officials, won't I be able to eat you, Fan Jian? Once I dug all the way to Jiangnan, the court would remember Fan Xian's 20 million liang of silver, but the corresponding crimes would make Fan Xian unable to bear the consequences. When the scholar heard the names of the 4 officials, particularly the last person's name, his eyes also lit up. His expression was also incomparably calm. He thought to himself, Minister Fan's methods were exquisite. It looked like his and Lao Shu's worries these days were unnecessary. After all, the Crown Prince was young. He did not have the scholar's meticulous thoughts, nor did he have the scholar's photographic memory. Thus, he did not see the trap in this. Under the guidance of the idea of pursuing a desperate enemy bravely, he joyfully, and without seeking fame, ordered his faction of officials to launch a general attack on this problem. Although the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, faintly stood on the side of the eldest princess and the second prince. In this good situation, and with the Crown Prince opening the way, he was happy to help. He held a small flag by the Crown Prince's side and cheered. Although he did not personally draw his knife, his cheers rang out endlessly. who the scholar watched from the side and smiled to himself. The investigation of the Ministry of Revenue had reached a critical moment. In the great hall deep in the courtyard, the Crown Prince's proud laughter rang out. In his hand, he held the official's confession. His body shook, and his royal aura flared. A cold light gradually appeared in his eyes as he interrogated the Ministry of Revenue official kneeling in front of him. "Speak. Where did the 400,000 liang of silver in this account go?" It was late in spring, and the weather had become hot. The sixth-level official kneeling miserably in front of the officials was already soaked in sweat. The color of his official robes had become dark red. Hearing the Crown Prince's stern yell, he wanted to cry, but had no tears. He thought, "I was just a handler. How would I know where the minister had moved this silver to?" The Crown Prince saw the official's panicked expression and glanced at him with disgust. He immediately thought of his own goal and could only say in a gentle voice, "You were the one who signed the transfer of this silver. You have to explain the way out. The court's silver cannot be used carelessly like this." The official could not stand the pressure of extorting a confession and stammered. It was left behind by the vice director of the Jiangsu Department of Clear Officials. There were 7 departments in the Ministry of Revenue. They were managed by a minister and a vice director. They were 5th-level officials. The vice director of the Jiangsu Department of Clear Officials was named Fong Li. He was already a relatively high-ranking official in the Ministry of Revenue. This name, along with the other 3 ministers of the Ministry of Revenue, were all targets the Crown Prince's investigation officials had already grasped. Today, they were going to be interrogated in court, so the Ministry of Revenue could no longer deny it. The Crown Prince was somewhat satisfied with the 6th-level official's performance, but his face darkened. In a cold voice, he said, "Go and wait to hear the testimony." The official retreated out of the great hall in a fluster with a sullen face. He didn't know what he was about to face. Summon that person called Fong Li in. The Crown Prince was in high spirits and had no idea that his conduct was already somewhat out of line. As he gave out orders, he did not even ask for the opinion of the nominal leading official, who the scholar. In a moment, the vice director of the Ministry of Revenue called Fong Li walked in and bowed to the officials of the various departments around him. His manner was arrogant, as if he did not know what was about to happen. The Crown Prince looked at this person's face, and his heart suddenly thumped. He felt that this face was somewhat familiar. He thought about it carefully and found that he had heard this official's name before. However, the person had already been summoned to the court. There was not much time for him to think. Who the scholar and Yin Hangshu still maintained their cunning silence. They gave the entire stage to the Crown Prince and let him play by himself. The Crown Prince looked at the 2 officials beside him and quietly snorted. He thought that the world was going to be his in the future. What did interrogating a few Ministry of Revenue officials count for? As long as he could connect Fan Jian to the deficit in these 4 places and the silver in Jiangnan, even if his current appearance was ugly and he lost the dignity of the Eastern Palace, he couldn't care too much. Thus, he slammed the chopping board and asked in a cold voice, "Report your name and official rank." The vice director of Jiangsu Road of the Ministry of Revenue, Fong Li, paused. His lips trembled as he looked at the Crown Prince with a face full of shock. He had not expected the Crown Prince to be so strict with him. His face flushed red. With great difficulty, he raised his hands in a salute and replied, "I am the vice director of Jiangsu Road of the Ministry of Revenue, Fong Li." The Crown Prince furrowed his brows and had an Overwatch Council official hand over the files he had found these few days, as well as the statement of the earlier official who had signed to transfer the silver. He asked darkly, "Tell me, where did these 400,000 liang of silver go?" It was like Fong Li had been struck by lightning. He looked at the Crown Prince like an idiot. Or perhaps he looked at the Crown Prince like an idiot? He trembled for a long time before he said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness, I truly do not know." The Crown Prince furrowed his brows and looked worried for the country and the people. "Just to say I do not know. I'm afraid it doesn't make sense." Fong Li was truly dumbfounded, particularly when he heard the Crown Prince say the word, "I'm afraid," with a twist. His heart dropped into an ice cellar. He understood what he heard and saw. It looked like the crown prince had not only forgotten who he was, he had even completely forgotten the 400,000 liang of silver. His heart was sorrowful, mocking, and helpless. That's right, what was he? He was just a minor official in the Ministry of Revenue. In the past, he had done things for the crown prince and drank with him at the same table. Why did the crown prince need to remember his ordinary and unremarkable face? What was that 400,000 liang of silver? The crown prince of that time liked women, liked to spend money on women, liked to build gardens for women to play with, and liked to reward his trusted officials. Who was the crown prince? The crown prince was the future master of the country. All the money in the world would be his in the future. If he used it, then he used it. Why would he waste his noble thoughts to remember where the money had come from? Fong Li's mouth was dry. He stared at the crown prince, dumbfounded. He hoped the crown prince would be able to remember something to prevent this absurd and unbelievable situation from continuing to develop to an unmanageable stage. It was a pity that the crown prince did not seem to notice the flirtatious gaze of this Ministry of Revenue official. The work of investigating the case continued. The vice minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Fong Li, knew that this matter was too big. Furthermore, it was being investigated in front of all the officials. Once the truth was revealed, it would be impossible to take it back. Thus, he gritted his teeth and refused to say another word. The crown prince had already felt that something was amiss. He frowned and looked at this familiar-looking official. He didn't understand where the other party got his courage from. The confession was right in front of him, yet he didn't say a word. Could it be that the other party wanted to take all the blame for Fan Jian? Or rather, there had always been secrets to this matter. At this moment, the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, who had been watching silently from the side, suddenly slammed the table and yelled sternly, "This bastard is guts! Someone come, drag him out, and interrogate him properly." He turned his head and asked, "Sir, who? Can we use torture?" Who the scholar, who had been staring at the ants fighting in front of his shoes, seemed to finally understand what had happened. He opened a pair of listless eyes and said, Use torture?" There was no tone to the last word of torture. It was not clear whether it was a question or an agreement. Yan Hangshu raised his hands impatiently and said, "I will listen to your arrangements." The official of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council accepted the order and prepared to go forward and drag the stubborn vice minister of the Ministry of Appointments out. Fong Li, who had been stubborn the entire time, heard that he was going to go into prison and heard the words, "use torture." Amidst his fear, he finally couldn't control his nerves. In a shrill voice, he cried out, "I have been wrongly accused. I was a scholar in the first year of the Qin calendar. For years later, I was promoted to vice minister. It is all thanks to the emperor's vast and mighty grace. How could I do such a perverted thing?" A string of words sprayed out, but this person had some ability. In such a tense moment, he defended himself. He still only looked at who the scholar and refused to look at the crown prince even if he died. When Yan Hangshu broke his silence and jumped out to suggest using torture, the strange feeling in the crown prince's heart grew deeper. When he heard Fong Li's defense, he felt a chill run down his back, piercing deep into his bones. A scholar in the first year of the Qin calendar? The son of the previous Minister of Rights, Guo Baoquan, a palace who had always been on good terms with the crown prince, had been born in the first year of the Qin calendar. Fong Li and Guo Baoquan were the same year. The crown prince was shocked. Countless things from the past resurfaced in his heart. In an instant, he remembered many things. Back then, because of Guo Baoquan's recommendation, he had lowered himself to have a meal with this minor Ministry of Revenue official called Fong Li. Through the eldest princess's arrangements, he had been promoted twice in the Ministry of Revenue. Later, the crown prince had hinted to Guo Baoquan and his trusted aide, and Fong Li had secretly moved a batch of silver from the Ministry of Revenue for him to use. However, a few years had passed. That sum of silver had long been spent to an unknown place. Guo Baoquan had also long died somewhere unknown. The crown prince had originally forgotten about this matter, and this minor official called Fong Li, Who would have thought that he would meet this person again when investigating the Ministry of Revenue today? Had the 400,000 liang of silver flowed into his pocket? The Crown Prince looked at Fong Li being dragged out of the hall by the Overwatch Council officials with a face full of shock. His mouth began to taste bitter, and his heart began to tighten. He knew that he could not allow this official to be interrogated by the three departments. Otherwise, there would be a big problem. He knew that he had already made the stupidest mistake. He could not allow this mistake to continue. He glared viciously at the smiling Minister of Appointments, Yin Hangshu, beside him and shouted angrily, "Wait!" The manner of the Minister of Rights, who had been brought down by Fan Xian, was nominally close to the Eastern Palace, but in reality, he was the eldest princess's trusted aide. The Crown Prince had discovered this fact the night the Crown Prince had recited poetry. Since the other party was the eldest princess's person, then Yin Hangshu would know that he had borrowed money from the Ministry of Revenue through Guobaoquan. The Crown Prince thought hatefully. It would have been fine if this old man didn't remind him, but he actually wanted to kick him when he was down. "Your Highness, what is it?" Yin Hangshu gazed at him with a slight smile. The Crown Prince was momentarily speechless. He was already riding a tiger. He had single-handedly created such a large-scale investigation. In the end, the investigation had reached him. How was he going to wrap things up? He furrowed his brows and narrowed his eyes. It looks like this official has something to say. There's no harm in asking first. Yin Hangshu smiled and nodded. Naturally, who the scholar had no objections. Fong Li had escaped death and knew that the Crown Prince had finally remembered him. He let out a big breath. However, when he met the Crown Prince's worried gaze, they both knew that the matter today was truly difficult to deal with. Ruthlessness flashed through the Crown Prince's heart. He suddenly remembered that Guobaoquan had long disappeared. As long as he refused to admit it and then thought of a way to make this Fong Li shut his mouth, he would be able to clear his name. Having thought this through, he said with a gentle expression, "Fong Li, you have to think carefully about where this silver will go. I have come to investigate a case under the Imperial Edict. Of course, I will not let a corrupt official go, but I will not wrongly accuse any good official." A glimmer of hope flashed through Fong Li's eyes. He knew that the Crown Prince was hinting at him to randomly accuse others. Since this 400,000 liang of silver had been dug up in front of who the scholar, Minister Yin, and the officials of the Supreme Court and Overwatch Council, it could not be shut up again. Fong Li knew that this was the only way. He lowered his head and his eyes darted around. He made up his mind, but for a moment, he didn't know who to push it on to. Back then, after he took the money, he had secretly destroyed the account books. However, for such a large amount of silver, it would be difficult to find another name. Yin Hangshu glanced at the Crown Prince and sighed in his heart. He knew that the other party was prepared to sacrifice a pawn, and this pawn also seemed to be prepared to be sacrificed. He couldn't help but be surprised. How could such an incompetent person like the Crown Prince make this minor official, Fong Li, so convinced? Earlier, the Crown Prince had clearly forgotten this person. He didn't understand that in Fong Li's heart, the Crown Prince was going to inherit the throne. As long as he didn't die in this matter, then there would come a day when he could turn things around. But for 400,000 liang of silver, how could the emperor spare the life of a minor minister counselor? It was clear that Fong Li had not thought of this. Without letting Fong Li think for too long under the scrutinizing gazes of all the officials, a slightly tired voice had already helped him answer and helped him out of his predicament. At the same time, it put a rope around the Crown Prince's body. I remember this debt. Back then, the Ministry of Rights sent out an order. Because the emperor had ordered the repairs to the various roads for the autumn examinations and the schools, silver had to be transferred from ministry. In total, it was transferred 14 times. In total, it was 400,700 liang of silver. The silver has already been sent to the Ministry of Rights. The Ministry of Rights should have a receipt. However, I did not personally take care of these matters. I will find out in a moment. All matters are carried out according to the laws of the Qing court. Everyone, please do not make things difficult for these pitiful officials under my command. As for whether or not there is a problem with this sum of silver, We only need to send an order to the various provinces to see the status of the repairs to the schools these 2 years, and we will know for sure. Minister Fan, who had been sick for many days, finally forced his weak and sick body to the Ministry of Revenue Yamen that he had not seen for many days. He leaned against the door and weakly explained each stroke to the officials in the hall. An official of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council quickly went forward to support him, who the scholar led Yin Hangshu and a group of investigating officials to quickly stand and bow. Although they were investigating officials, no one dared to show any disrespect. This was the first time this Minister of Revenue, who had led the Ministry of Revenue for 9 years, had arrived at the Yamen. As soon as he opened his mouth, he spoke on behalf of his subordinates. However, he also pointed out the whereabouts of the silver. As long as it was investigated, the truth would come to light. As a result, the Crown Prince's face paled and his eyes began to wander. Of course, I still have a strong desire to retrieve it. I won't be stingy on this matter. The things inside are too important to me. Only today did I remember that my dad's diary and notes are also inside. 3 black lines. Looking at the book review section, I'm really grateful for everyone's comfort and suggestions. I'm sure the hard drive's wounded heart is also very comforted. If I can't get it done today, he'll really be eternally dead and can rest in peace in the netherworld. Of course, I still have a strong desire to retrieve it. Then, he discovered that there were a lot of people from the same hometown and was pleasantly surprised. He didn't have time to greet them one by one, so he cupped his hands and said, "Let's eat noodles together when you're free. There will be a time for me to eat with you." P.S. I just want to take a look. There seem to be some bad omens. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 391. Minister, Sir who the scholar's face was full of smiles as he welcomed Minister Fan in. The officials responsible for investigating the Ministry of Revenue also gathered around and all expressed their comfort to the sick minister. Even the Minister of Appointments, Yin Hangshu, could not stay out. His old face was full of sincere worry and concern. The people of the Overwatch Council investigating the Ministry of Revenue had long carefully helped Minister Fan block the wind blowing in from outside the door. They were very eager. Regardless of whether or not the court truly wanted to investigate the Ministry of Revenue, regardless of whether or not the Emperor truly wanted Minister Fan to resign, as long as Fan Jian was in court, as long as the Emperor did not tear apart this layer of brotherly affection, as long as Fan Xian, far away in Jiangnan, was still alive, these officials in court did not dare to slight Minister Fan. Thus, the scene at this moment had an absurd sense of comedy. The Minister of Revenue who was being investigated was being cared for and carefully protected by everyone, particularly the investigating officials of the Overwatch Council. In particular, the investigating officers of the Overwatch Council were all from the First Bureau, led by Mu Tai. The First Bureau was still under Fan Xian's direct control, and Fan Jian was their superior's father. What else could they do? The Crown Prince's face alternated between green and white. Looking at the scene in front of him, a great sense of unease welled up in his heart. Fan Jian had said he was sick and had not come to the Ministry of Revenue for many days. Now that he had arrived, he seemed to have attracted everyone's gaze. This official, who usually did not show himself, seemed to have some kind of aura about him. Although he was the Crown Prince and the future ruler of Qing Kingdom, facing Minister Fan, he still had no choice but to stand up. Piling a warm smile on his face, he comfortingly said, "Minister, are you feeling better?" The Crown Prince was not afraid of Fan Xian or concerned about the Overwatch Council. However, as a member of the royal family, particularly the successor to the throne, he had to display a certain bearing. The relationship between the Fan family and the Li family was too deep. In Danzhou, there was still an old woman watching from afar. The Crown Prince did not know what kind of feelings the Emperor still had for that wet nurse. Fan Jian smiled shamefully and said, "The Ministry of Revenue matters were all started by me, yet I have to trouble your Highness and Sir Hu. It is truly my fault." After exchanging a few pleasantries, everyone took their seats. Although Fan Jian belonged to the side that was being criticized, he had always been targeting the Minister of Revenue. Thus, he openly sat in the middle of the room, not wanting to pass on his responsibility. This was the Ministry of Revenue, Fan Jian's territory. After everything had calmed down, everyone turned their gazes to the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Fong Li, who was still in his original spot. Everyone had a different look in their eyes. Yin Hangshu was gloating. The Crown Prince was hesitant, who the scholar was cold, and the Overwatch Council furrowed their brows. Only Minister Fan's face was calm. It was as if he had not thought that this person called Fong Li would implicate so many people. At this point, the Crown Prince naturally understood everything. Fan Jian was a shameless, cunning, and silent old fox. When the court began to investigate the Ministry of Revenue, it should be said that as early as a few years ago, when the Crown Prince extended his hand to the Ministry of Revenue, Fan Jian had already been watching this scene with cold eyes. Then, he used extremely shrewd and ruthless methods to quietly cover up this matter without anyone noticing. However, on the other hand, he purposely left behind a small tail that did not draw attention. With a light flick, it was thrown to one of the 7 bureaus. In this way, not only did they cover up for the Crown Prince, but they also had the Crown Prince's weakness. Most importantly, this kind of cover also covered up the officials on the Crown Prince's side. Thus, this 400,000 liang of silver turned into nothingness and was wiped clean. It was so clean that even Fong Li thought there were no more problems. In addition, there was the collapse of the Ministry of Rights and a sliver of the Crown Prince's stupidity. In the entire world, only Fan Jian knew the entire process. This minister, with unusual shrewdness, did not directly throw it out to attack the enemy. Instead, he left a trace of the head of the thread in the weeds. For example, the winter clothes worn by the soldiers in the snowy north or the siege machines that were not needed on the Southie battlefront. When the court began to investigate the Ministry of Revenue, they would find the head of the thread and gently pull on it. In the end, they would pull on their own belts. This was a trap that had been buried for a few years. Fan Jian did not need to do anything. He only needed to wait for the moment he was threatened and create a certain situation so that some people would grab onto the belt they had long forgotten and pull hard. A good trap. The investigation into the Ministry of Rights had already begun. Although the Ministry of Rights had undergone a major change after Guo Yu was tied to death in the Celestial Prison, and all of the documents were a bit messy, under the powerful investigation of the court's investigation team and the Overwatch Council's careful search, the transfer order the Ministry of Rights sent out matched up with the receipt that the Ministry of Revenue had secretly kept. The 400,000 liang of silver had indeed been sent to the Ministry of Rights. The problem was, the Ministry of Rights had moved 400,000 liang of silver to repair the school buildings and the autumn school. Where did they go? Grand Scholar, who had been inspecting all over the world for a long time, and then entered the Hall of Governmental Affairs to oversee matters. Of course, he knew that the schools in the various provinces were still broken. In many places, the autumn school offices would still leak rain. Thus, his expression became increasingly ugly. He faced the official of the Ministry of Rights in front of him and asked, "Who can tell me where these 400,000 liang of silver went?" Who the scholar lightly turned his body and glanced at the Crown Prince. He sighed in his heart. In reality, everyone in the hall was well aware of the situation in the court over the past few years. The Ministry of Rights had always been the backyard of the Eastern Palace. The Ministry of Rights did not have the guts to move 400,000 taels of silver around. Everyone could guess that the silver had flowed to the Eastern Palace. However, since the investigation had reached the Eastern Palace, it seemed that this matter would be difficult to continue. Who the scholar was silent for a moment and then said, "The most important problem right now is to find out the whereabouts of these 400,000 liang of silver." The Crown Prince's heart jumped, but he smiled warmly on his face. Sir Hu's words are reasonable. Mutai of the First Bureau of the Overwatch Council did not have the right to sit beside these officials. He had been standing to the side the entire time. He looked at the expression of Minister Fan sitting in the middle and suddenly said, "The silver did reach the Ministry of Rights. However, The official who handled this matter died in the spring examination case the year before last. The crown prince was silent to the side. Guayu had already died, and Guabaoquin had been lost. Now that the Overwatch Council had confirmed the specific death of the person who handled it, even if the eldest princess knew of his connection to the 400,000 liang of silver, she would not be able to find any evidence to give to the scholar. Thus, his heart felt slightly at ease. While he felt slightly at ease, he couldn't help feeling sorrow and anger. "Aunt, why are you doing this?" Unexpectedly, Mutai's next words chilled the crown prince's heart. In a serious voice, he said, "However, there are always some clues that can be investigated. Scholar, do you think we should have the Overwatch Council investigate the Ministry of Rights?" Investigate the Ministry of Rights? Everyone in the hall was startled. They thought, have this group of wolf-like Overwatch Council investigate the Ministry of Rights? If the court investigated the Ministry of Revenue, it would clearly make Sir Fan Jr. far away and Jiangnan angry. If the Overwatch Council investigated the Ministry of Rights, under Sir Fan Jr.'s remote control, the pitiful officials of the Ministry of Rights would probably not survive. However, Mutai's request seemed very reasonable. Fan Jian lightly stroked his long beard. His face was expressionless, but in his heart, he was thinking that Ji's trusted aide seemed to have a much better brain than before to be able to guess his thoughts. Fan Jian's thoughts were very simple. Didn't the court want to investigate the Ministry of Revenue? If the Ministry of Revenue wanted to protect itself, it had to open up the battle lines and drag in more departments. The Ministry of Rights was only the beginning. Once all 6 ministries were found to have problems, the wise emperor would not be able to remove all the ministers of the 6 ministries from their positions. The Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, glanced at Fan Jian and greatly admired this old fox. He quickly shook his head and refuted. The court has clearly ordered to investigate the Ministry of Revenue. It is not good to spread it too widely. Fan Jian smiled insincerely and said, "Reasonable, reasonable." Everyone could hear the mockery in these 2 words of reasonable. Yan Hangshu's face blushed. He knew his suggestion was unreasonable. Since the Ministry of Revenue's deficit involved the Ministry of Rights, they should continue to investigate. The scholar's expression was also awkward. He persuaded, "Let's discuss it for a while. Let's discuss it for a while more." If they let go and ask for an edict for the Overwatch Council to investigate the Ministry of Rights, in the end, they would certainly investigate the Crown Prince. Thus, before entering the palace to ask for an edict, the scholar did not dare to make such a decision. The Crown Prince gritted his teeth and said, "The matter of the Ministry of Rights has to be investigated. However, there is a priority. The matter of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit has not been clearly investigated. If we expand it too widely, I'm afraid it will hinder the Emperor's edict." Fan Jian continued to smile slightly and said, "The Crown Prince is reasonable, reasonable." The scholar sighed in his heart and said, "Concerning the matter of the Ministry of Rights, please enter the palace in a moment to listen to the imperial edict. According to the Crown Prince's intentions, the Ministry of Revenue should continue. If they continued to investigate, the Ministry of Revenue would certainly find more problems. In the end, the 400,000 liang of silver was only the tip of the iceberg. The Crown Prince did not believe the Fan family would be so clean in the Ministry of Revenue. Of course, the Ministry of Revenue was not clean. Minister Fan had set up a trap, and the Crown Prince was not the only one buried in it. As the investigation gradually deepened, a few more departments were successfully dragged into the water by the Ministry of Revenue. The Supreme Court bore the brunt of it. The expression of the long-silent official of the Supreme Court immediately changed. He felt incredibly awkward. The Ministry of Revenue did not have bad accounts, but there were too many hidden accounts. Each deficit pointed to a certain side in the court. In the end, even a small yamen like the Imperial College could not escape. The Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, began to be cautious. Although the Ministry of Revenue had found a problem, it did not involve the eldest princess or the second prince. Because he was on his side, the money always flowed through the palace treasury. But seeing how well prepared Fan Jian and the Ministry of Revenue were, Who knew if he would not be so sinister as to use some kind of excuse to trick the second prince? Let's stop here for now. Yin Hangshu furrowed his brows and said, after entering the palace to ask for an edict, we'll continue tomorrow. Reasonable. Fan Jian continued to smile as he said these two words. But the scholar's face was cold. He looked at the officials in the investigation group and thought, how could the court become so corrupt? If the emperor truly had the determination to continue investigating, Minister Fan would have to resign. As long as the investigation didn't reach Jiangnan, he would not have to take too much responsibility. However, the other officials in court would probably be mostly unlucky. In the royal palace in late spring, red apricots occasionally appeared on the low walls of the inner palace. The green trees and beautiful flowers contrasted against each other. The beautiful scenery entered one's eyes and did not want to be taken away. It was already dusk, and in the blink of an eye, it was dark. The door to the royal study opened and closed and opened again, and a few ministers came and went in succession. In the end, there was only the lonely emperor left in the room. There was also the old eunuch and a bright candle. Ha! Anger flared in the Qing emperor's eyes. He slammed his palm on the wooden table, but not a drop of tea spilled out. In a cold voice, he said, what a ministry of revenue, what a eastern palace. Do you really think I don't dare to kill? The officials who had entered the royal study to discuss matters were the officials responsible for investigating the Ministry of Revenue after receiving the edict. Hearing their reports, the Qing emperor's anger gradually grew. His original intention was only to investigate the Ministry of Revenue and use the matter of the Ministry of Revenue moving silver to Jiangnan to persuade Fan Jian to abdicate. He used this relatively open method to re-establish the balance in court. However, he had never expected that the Ministry of Revenue was much cleaner than he had imagined. Fan Jian was much cleaner than he had imagined. On the contrary, it was the other 5 ministries and 3 temples in court who had benefited greatly from the Ministry of Revenue, particularly the Eastern Palace. Earlier, who the scholar had already secretly reported on the matter of the Ministry of Rights and sadly hinted that it was best not to continue investigating the Ministry of Revenue matter. Otherwise, it would truly make the court restless. Before the Ministry of Revenue could bear the blame they deserved, the other officials of the other ministries would probably start eating prison food. While the emperor was angry, he couldn't help but feel chilled by the Ministry of Revenue's methods. That was why he had flown into a thunderous rage earlier. In his view, since Fan Jian had long known about these matters, why did he continue to hide it? It was not until he was prepared to move against the Ministry of Revenue that he suddenly threw it out and caught the officials off guard. Wasn't this also catching him, the emperor, off guard? He and Fan Jian had grown up together, so he knew the abilities of his housekeeper. He was not surprised at the Ministry of Revenue's deep and scheming response. He was angry that the officials in court had failed to live up to expectations and had been tied onto this big boat by the Ministry of Revenue. He was even more angry that the crown prince was so stupid. How could he dare to pass the world to him? Of course, the emperor was even more angry at Fan Jian's sharp counterattack because this comrade he is threatening me. The emperor furrowed his brows and said coldly. Old eunuch Hong, whose face was covered in age spots, shook his head and sighed. Your Majesty, I'm not afraid to say too much. People are always selfish. Even a loyal official like Minister Fan would have to think of some way to protect himself in such a dangerous situation. The emperor's voice was slightly sharp. With a mocking smile, he said, playing with schemes like this is considered a loyal official? Old eunuch Hong sighed and said, Director Chun loves to play with schemes, but in terms of loyalty, I'm afraid even I do not dare to say I am above him. The emperor slowly closed his eyes and said, Chen Pingping has saved my life countless times. How can Fan Jian compare? Minister Fan has managed the Ministry of Revenue these years and quietly smoothed out all the hidden dangers. Why? Is it not for the peace of the court? Old eunuch Hong sighed. If Minister Fan truly had any disloyal intentions, the evidence in his hands would be enough for him to do many things. However, he still hasn't done anything. This means that he just doesn't want the court to be shaken. He should at least tell me first, the emperor said coldly. Old eunuch Hong said quietly, based on the news the Fan Manor has sent back these years, the reason Minister Fan has never entered the palace to report in detail is because he doesn't want your majesty to waste your energy. Your majesty should still remember the news that came a few days ago. The emperor thought of the news Zhang Ta had reported. His mood gradually calmed. He recovered some of his good feelings toward Fan Jian. He furrowed his brows and said, however, the Ministry of Revenue still has to continue investigating. Otherwise, if it ends hastily, what will happen to the face of the court? What is important is your majesty's current attitude toward Minister Fan. Eunuch Hong asked with his head lowered. The emperor shook his head. He can no longer be Minister of Revenue. I can give him other compensations, but he can no longer lead the Ministry of Revenue. And Ziyuan manages the palace treasury in Jiangnan. No matter how you look at it, and Ziyuan is not suitable to continue holding the position of Minister of Revenue. A sense of sorrow rose in old eunuch Hong's heart. He felt some sympathy for the minister who had racked his brains these years. Probingly, he said, there is something I don't know if I should say or not. Speak. Eunuch Hong said in a slightly sharp voice. Sir Fan Jr. is a genius. Your Majesty has arranged for him to take over the palace treasury and the Overwatch Council. As for Minister Fan, according to common sense, he should indeed no longer be in charge of the Ministry of Revenue. Perhaps your Majesty still remembers that in the first year of the Qin calendar, Fan Jian, who was still an assistant minister at the time, had once made a ruckus with Director Chun in this royal study. Minister Fan, in his bones, does not wish for Sir Fan Jr. to control the Overwatch Council. Continue. The emperor furrowed his brows tightly. He knew what Eunuch Hong's words implied. After all, Minister Fan was once a distinguished scholar, Eunuch Hong said with a slight smile. Old Eunuch Hong smiled slightly and said, he is an affectionate person. I have always thought that any affectionate person can become someone's fetters. With Minister Fan staying in the capital and Sir Fan Jr. acting in Jiangnan, it will be much safer. The emperor's expression was calm. A moment later, he said, earlier in the Empress Dowager's palace, the Empress Dowager also said the same thing. First, for the sake of Danzhou's mother, the palace has to give the Fan Manor more support. Second, if Fan Jian stays in the capital, Fan Xian will indeed feel more at ease doing things in Jiangnan. What did it mean to feel at ease? It was nothing more than a secret precaution and threat. He could be a duke or a marquis. The emperor finally said with a cold face, I will not mistreat the Fan family, but I will also not let the matter of the Ministry of Revenue end like this. Using the title of Duke and Marquis to trade for the position of minister, it was unknown whether Fan Jian would be at a disadvantage or gain an advantage. In the Fan Manor, Fan Jian closed his eyes and drank a sour berry, enjoying Lady Lu's massage from behind him. He sighed and said, I'm afraid the emperor will mistakenly think I am threatening him. That won't be good. Lady Lu's expression darkened slightly. She knew this matter would be difficult to resolve. Although the palace would not go too far toward the manor, it looked like the old master would eventually have to step down from the position of Minister of Revenue. The emperor's intentions had already, through Yi Guipin, once again accurately and cautiously reached the Fan Manor. These few days, the Ministry of Revenue's investigation continued unhappily. It had implicated even more people, turning the entire court into a pool of muddy water. The civil and military officials were all panicking. The Overwatch Council had already arrested a number of people, and the Ministry of Revenue itself had also been found to have some problems. However, the efforts of some factions had not yet achieved results. No one had been able to uncover the secret silver route between the Ministry of Revenue and Jiangnan. Many people, including the eldest princess, began to feel a strong sense of unease. Was the silver Fan Xian used in Jiangnan truly not from the Ministry of Revenue? As long as there was no major crime, even the emperor could not forcefully ask Fan Jian to resign and confess. The summer flood is about to arrive. Fan Jian smiled slightly. The court needs silver, so the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue will slow down. I will waste it with the emperor. As long as it lasts until Fan Xian returns to the capital next year, there won't be much of a problem. Lady Lu smiled. Only now did she know that what the old master had been waiting for was nothing more than a flood that the heavens would send down. Using the might of heaven against the might of heaven, the emperor was not an incapable ruler. He knew which was more important. I just don't know what the situation is on Fan Xian's side, Fan Jian said with some worry. Fan Jian said with slight worry. Transferring money to the river works took away a lot of his confidence. The Ming family is not so easy to swallow. Still tangled with the hard drive. Thank you for everyone's concern. Also, Ingxiu was written by me. I can't make money, so I stopped. I thought everyone already knew this. P.S. The female section is currently holding a selection for the best works of the year. Presumably, there are many brothers and sisters who read books who are monthly subscribers. Please vote for what I wrote at the end of the tunnel. Even immortals have Jianghu. Thank you, everyone. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 392. The rain continued to fall. The flowers in various gardens in Jingdo had long bloomed. They gradually fell and sank into the mud. As for the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue, the palace was still waiting for a result. This made things difficult for the officials in court. At this point, the officials knew that if anyone wanted to bring down the Ministry of Revenue, they themselves had to fall first. There was no need for Sir Fan Jr., who was far away in Jiangnan, to speak. Sir Fan Sr., who was in the capital, had already displayed enough trump cards. No matter how they investigated, they couldn't find themselves. Who would want to do such an idiotic thing? Furthermore, the Crown Prince had already foolishly given a very good demonstration. In officialdom, the most important thing was the Emperor's golden words. The second most important thing was the so-called unwritten rules. Currently, the Ministry of Revenue was swaying between these two matters. However, no matter how it swayed, it stubbornly held on and refused to fall. Fan Jian refused to resign and end this matter. Even though there were rumors in the palace that the emperor was prepared to use a rarely seen high rank to express compensation, the Fan family still stubbornly held on. For a moment, the officials in the capital couldn't help but admire Fan Jian's confidence in the depths of their hearts. In reality, Fan Jian did not stubbornly hold on. After the Ministry of Revenue had implicated enough officials and the Crown Prince began to turn his gaze to other areas, such as protecting himself and dragging a few of his brothers into the water, the Minister of Revenue did not return to the Ministry of Revenue Yamen. Instead, he began to leisurely drink tea in his manor, go to the manor to look at the mountains and rivers, and occasionally visit the manors he was on good terms with. It was not convenient for him to go to other manors at this time, because he did not want to cause trouble for others at the juncture of investigating the Ministry of Revenue. No one dared to get too close to him. However, King Jing's manor was an exception. King Jing was the Empress Dowager's son, the youngest son, and the Emperor's younger brother. He had been silent and well-behaved for many years, doing gardening. Everyone in the palace knew what his attitude meant, so they never really cared about him. Fan Jian and King Jing had always been on good terms. It was normal for him to go to his manor. Furthermore, given King Jing's personality, he was not afraid of anything. Then one day, Fan Jian entered the palace and had a deep and sincere conversation with the emperor in the royal study. He very sincerely confessed his thoughts to the emperor. He analyzed it from all aspects and felt that it was more suitable for him to continue to be the Minister of Revenue. On this issue, he did not hide anything from the emperor. Lingering was not a longing for battle. In such a seemingly peaceful but actually complicated situation, Fan Jian analyzed himself and the court stroke by stroke. He advised the emperor that he should take back the order to investigate the Ministry of Revenue. Only then would it be the best choice for the Qing kingdom. This was an honorable path. Even the emperor was a little surprised that he did not hide his own talents and was so honorable and upright. The next day, it was said that King Jing also entered the palace. According to the rumors, This preposterous king muttered to himself for a long time in the Empress Dowager's Hanwang Palace. In the end, he even argued with the Empress Dowager's ancestor. As for what they argued about, no one knew. That night, the Empress Dowager and the Emperor watched a play together. While eating melon seeds, the Empress Dowager told the Emperor about King Jing entering the palace. The Emperor smiled and didn't say anything. The Empress Dowager's meaning was clear. Her attitude was still the same as when Fan Xian had first entered Jingdou. The Fan family had done so much for the Li family, so they couldn't be treated too badly. Besides, it would not look good to have the youngest son enter the palace every day to make a fuss. Most importantly, this ancestor of the Empress Dowager knew that her grandsons were probably all looking bad in the Ministry of Revenue matter. If they investigated the Ministry of Revenue and found a royal family, where would the royal family put their face? Minister Fan had always thought that the emperor would always care about face more than the officials. He had not thought that the first person to feel embarrassed would be the Empress Dowager. However, the effect was about the same. The next day, the edict came down. Although, in order to maintain the system of the court, it did not clearly take back the imperial edict to investigate the Ministry of Revenue. Using the excuse of state affairs, the emperor moved most of the officials in the joint investigation group back to their original ministries. Without question, the strength of the investigation of the Ministry of Revenue would be greatly weakened. The officials all let out a breath. The so-called good for you, good for me, good for everyone. It was just a smooth sailing court. Why did it have to be so deadly? Everyone knew that the reason the palace's strength in investigating the Ministry of Revenue had weakened was certainly related to King Jing's ruckus in the palace. Thinking of this, the officials couldn't help but feel a strange feeling rise in their hearts. The Fan Manor and King Jing's manor had been on good terms for generations. This was something everyone knew. But things were different now. Starting from last autumn, it seemed that many problems had appeared between the two families. First, the battle between Fan Xian and the second prince had involved King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing. Later, the young lady of the Fan family had shocked the world by being taken as the last disciple of the Northern Qi imperial advisor, Ku He. The marriage between the two families had fallen through. But King Jing had entered the palace? Had the relationship between the two families been repaired? The civil and military officials sighed. They felt more and more that Fan Jian was unfathomable. At the same time, the emperor issued a rather elusive personnel appointment. Imperial Censor He Zhongwei had been promoted to Imperial Censor of the Left and joined the team investigating the Ministry of Revenue. He Zhongwei had once been a famous scholar in Jingdou who was as famous as Ho Jichong of Fan Xian's four disciples. Because he had always been on good terms with Guobaoquan and had connections with the Ministry of Rites, he had delayed his steps into officialdom to avoid gossip. He waited until the spring examinations in the 5th year of the Qin calendar. Because of the death of a family member, he was forced to give up. As a result, this famous great scholar had never participated in the imperial examinations. In the hearts of the people, he was indeed an extremely unlucky person. On the other hand, He Zhongwei's luck had been very good. Back then, he had been on good terms with the Guo family and met the crown prince. His reputation had risen in the capital. Later, in the spring of the 5th year of the Qin calendar, he had coincidentally been involved in the matter of the previous prime minister's fall. In the end, he had caught the emperor's eye. Skipping over layers of procedures, he had been made an imperial censor of the imperial censor. In reality, everyone knew that this was because He Zhongwei was good at swaying and choosing sides well. At one moment, he stood on the crown prince's side, and at the next, he stood on Xinyang's side. Now, he had become the imperial censor of the left. For such a young figure to have reached such an official position, people couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Why did the emperor admire this person so much? It wasn't that such precedents had never existed before. For example, Sir Fan Jr. was younger than He Zhongwei and had a higher official position. He had more power in his hands, and his reputation was greater. The problem was, everyone knew that Sir Fan Jr. was a prince in the shadows. Furthermore, his reputation for both civil and martial arts was world famous. For him to have his current position was not surprising. But what was going on with Wei? Some gossipy officials couldn't help but secretly laugh. Could it be that the emperor had found another illegitimate child? Regardless of how the officials and people guessed, in the end, this Jingdo talent who had been hidden in the second prince's carriage, in the eldest princess manor, and in the imperial censor study had finally officially stepped onto the stage of history. Furthermore, he would shine endlessly in the years to come. Young, handsome, talented, in position, and with the emperor's appreciation, the imperial censor of the left, Wei, was like a rising sun that dazzled people's eyes. Fan Xian, far away in Jiangnan, was probably a black hole that could swallow the sun. No one would believe that last year, Fan Xian had used a black fist to beat this popular figure in court into a pig's head. This was Wei's lifelong humiliation. He knew that Sir Fan Jr., far away in Jiangnan, looked down on him from the bottom of his heart. Now that the emperor thought highly of him, he had to do something for the emperor. The situation that had made the crown prince's head ache finally eased, but he still had to think of a way to wipe out the 400,000 liang of silver. Last night, the Empress Dowager had given her grandson a good scolding in Hongguang Palace before telling him that the emperor was not in a good mood. Grandmother could block it for him this time, but it did not mean she could block it for him in the future. The crown prince felt a bit of regret. In reality, these 2 years after Fan Xian entered the capital, he had been doing pretty well. He was honest, peaceful, and even played less with women. However, the him 2 years ago was indeed a bit preposterous. He had left so many loose ends that people could easily grab. Thinking of this, he began to remember the Minister of Revenue who had grabbed onto his tail tightly and made him feel incomparable pain. The Fan family. Compared to the second prince, who he had hated endlessly in the past, the crown prince was now certain that in the next few years, his greatest enemy was, without question, the Fan family, regardless of whether the old one or the young one. The investigation of the Ministry of Revenue had already brought the Eastern Palace and the Fan family into close combat. This time, the Fan family had the upper hand. Regardless of whether or not the crown prince was willing to resolve this matter peacefully, given Fan Jian's intelligence, he knew that if the crown prince ascended to the throne, the Fan family would not have many good days. The crown prince was not the emperor. He had no feelings for the old woman far away in Danzhou. As for Fan Xian, because of the Yi family matter, this was an irreconcilable enmity. The crown prince could not hope that Fan Xian would stand on his side. He did not even hope that Fan Xian would not oppose him on the matter of inheriting the throne. Since the main conflict had been established, the other conflicts were secondary. All of the unhappiness of the past could be casually swept away. When his trusted aide sent him the second prince's invitation to meet on Lujing River, the crown prince thought for a moment and then agreed. He smiled coldly. He knew that his second brother also knew that if he wanted to defeat Fan Xian, relying on his own power was far from enough. There was only one chair. Regardless of whether it was the crown prince's or the second prince's, everyone could flash their daggers and snatch it again afterward. At the moment, they had to at least ensure that this chair would not fall under the third prince's, but in the current situation, the emperor's 2 sons had to let go of their former enmity and unite. Only by uniting all the power that could be united could they defeat that abnormal bastard far away in Jiangnan. On Lujing River, the spring was as thick as a woman's eyes, gradually warming up. It was as if summer was coming. On a pleasure boat, the crown prince and the second prince drank and chatted merrily, admiring the scenery and the beauty. It was as if nothing untoward had happened between the two of them in all these years. Since the second prince had taken the initiative to extend his hand, he had to express his stance first. First, he expressed his apologies for Minister of Justice Yan Hongshu's dishonorable act of adding insult to injury during the investigation of the Ministry of Revenue. Of course, he would not say it clearly. Although the crown prince could sometimes be a bit of an idiot, most of the time he could still be considered a smart person. The crown prince also sighed and said that after Fan Xian entered the capital, he had suppressed him less. The 2 brothers met each other's eyes and saw the faint worry and a glimmer of helplessness in each other's hearts. The power in Fan Xian's hands was too great. Furthermore, the old men standing behind him were too powerful. More importantly, it seemed that there were some people in the palace who were leaning toward his side. Li Changping and the third prince had always been by Fan Xian's side. What exactly did father mean by this arrangement? The crown prince and the second prince sank into silence at the same time. In the end, it was the second prince who slowly opened his mouth and said with a light laugh, "Your Highness, I heard that Fan Xian has opened a branch of Baiyue brothel in Suzhou. There are two girls inside who are very famous. One is a girl he stole from Hongqing's hands. The other is rather interesting. I heard she is a female slave in brother's manner." The crown prince lowered his eyes and gritted his teeth. With a cold huff, he said, "That big brother of ours, that day in the royal study, didn't he also speak up for Fan Xian? It looks like he is truly afraid of that great princess from northern Qi. Second brother, you and big brother are always close. How come you can't see that he is a fool?" The second prince raised his eyebrows and smiled. He chuckled and didn't continue to say anything. At this time, a warm breeze was blowing gently on the river. The pleasure boats swam slowly. The willow branches by the shore could not stand the gradually hot weather and hoped that the rain that had stopped in the morning would fall again. The expressions of the two people by the window were gentle. In reality, they each had their own ulterior motives. However, they had no choice but to sit together and discuss matters. He Zhongwei will continue to investigate the Ministry of Revenue, the second prince said with a slight smile. Don't worry, he knows his limits. The crown prince huffed coldly, including the Ministry of Rights and He Zhongwei. These people were actually originally close to the Eastern Palace. Later, they were all pulled over by the eldest princess and the second prince. Now, He Zhongwei had already established himself in court. How could the crown prince not hate him? He coldly said, "Don't forget, He Zhongwei is passionate about fame and is a true slave of 3 families. Today, he stands on your side. Who knows how he will stand in the future?" The second prince looked at the deep spring scenery outside the boat in a daze and sighed. "Don't worry, he won't throw his lot in with Fan Xian," the crown prince said, "but, given his present position, it seems that there is no need for him to continue staying under your tutelage." He mockingly said, "When all is said and done, this position was given to him by father." The second prince was slightly startled. He knew that the crown prince's words had meaning, but he couldn't be bothered to refute it. He smiled slightly and said, "It is not convenient for him to come today precisely because of the reason you mentioned. Since he is already a court official, of course, he has to pay attention to keeping his distance from us." However, the second prince turned to look at the crown prince. His face still held a harmless and gentle smile, but a glimmer of disgust grew in his heart. He also felt a bit uncomfortable that this person, whom he had always looked down on, was now forced to work together with him. "I have asked you to come today because someone wants to see you." The crown prince furrowed his brows and said, "Who is so arrogant as to dare call me to see him? Am I not allowed to?" A gentle, clear, and seductive female voice came from the back of the room. The moment this voice came out, it seemed to immediately drown out the beautiful sounds of the wind blowing through the willows and the light flight of birds. It was incomparably moving. The crown prince's expression changed. A complicated emotion flashed through his eyes. He was dumbstruck. A moment later, he slowly stood up and bowed toward the back of the room. He said self-mockingly, "After Aunt entered the palace, I have not seen Chengqian." Chengqian thought Aunt was not happy to see me. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, lifted the beaded curtain and slowly walked out. She gazed at the crown prince with a faint smile. The crown prince involuntarily felt a wave of nervousness. He didn't dare to look directly at that beautiful, otherworldly face. This time, it seems that we have all fallen for the Ministry of Revenue matter. Exhaustion appeared on the eldest princess' face, but it could not hide her brilliance. Suddenly, she burst into laughter and said, "This son-in-law of mine is truly interesting. He set up a trap for us to fall into." Fortunately, King Jing made a ruckus. Otherwise, if the matter got out of hand and we couldn't find evidence of the Ministry of Revenue stealing national funds to Jiangnan, it would be difficult to explain to the civil and military officials in court. The Ministry of Revenue's silver had made a round in Jiangnan and had long returned. Naturally, they couldn't find anything. Although some silver was still in the Jiangnan money house, the amount was not large. Given Fan Jian's ruthlessness, it was naturally covered up without any loopholes. The crown prince looked at his nose and quietly said, "Aunt, please give me some pointers. I just came to drink tea today," the eldest princess said with a slight smile. "After all, you are blood brothers. Everything can be laid out and discussed. Don't let outsiders laugh at you." When she said the words blood brothers, she put emphasis on the word blood and bit the tip of her tongue to emphasize her tone. Although it was a point, it revealed a glimmer of temptation. The crown prince said in a trembling voice, "But if the Ministry of Revenue can't find anything to use against Fan Xian, this person, there are no loopholes to grab. We can only wait for him to cultivate his wings in Jiangnan. What if he returns to the capital in the future? Naturally, the Ministry of Revenue will be investigated." The eldest princess's watery eyes stared at the crown prince's face. She smiled and said, "Brother Emperor has temporarily taken a step back. In the future, he will definitely take a big step forward. You don't have to worry about this. As for my son-in-law, you don't have to worry even more. And gee, this person looks like he won't budge. In reality, it is very easy to deal with him." The crown prince and second prince were both stunned, wondering where these words came from. For a person like Fan Xian, it was not easy to ruin him, and it was even harder to bring him down. It was impossible to destroy him spiritually, and it was even more difficult to destroy him physically. Why did the eldest princess say it so lightly? "My son-in-law," the eldest princess said gently, "looks heartless, but in reality, he is heartless but full of affection." After the secret conference on Lujing River ended, the second prince boarded the carriage under the protection of the 8 generals and returned directly to his manor in the north of Jingdou. Presently, one of the 8 generals had been killed by Fan Xian, and Fan Wujiu had been scared back to his home by the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau. There were only 6 people left. They had long lost their former prestige. The second prince had been a king for many years and had been married for many months. His relationship with Wang Fei had always been very good. There had not been any bad rumors. Wang Fei's surname was Yi, and her name was Ling Er. In the bedroom, Yi Ling Er draped a thin sky-blue robe over her husband. A faint worry floated on her usually cheerful face. The second prince turned around and glanced. His heart was slightly apologetic. Holding her slightly cold hands, he comfortingly said, "What are you thinking about?" "Today." Yi Ling Er bit her lower lip. A glimmer of struggle flashed through her bright, jade-like eyes. Finally, she gathered her courage and said, "Where did you go?" The second prince lowered his head and was silent for a moment. He then replied straightforwardly, "I went to Lujing River to see my aunt and the crown prince." A warmth welled up in Yi Ling Er's heart. It seemed that since the second prince did not hide such an important matter from her, it meant that he was truly treating her as someone close to him. She couldn't resist persuading. "Why? Isn't it better for us to live peacefully?" After being married for many months, the second prince was gentle and considerate. He did not show the domineering and shameless side of the royal family. This was partly because Yi Ling Er's background was also very deep. It was also because he had some affection for Yi Ling Er. The younger generation of the Qing kingdom had actually all grown up together, such as one the princes Yi Ling Er and the young lady of the Fan family. The division between the royal family and the trusted families was not clear. The second prince knew that his wife was thinking for him. He couldn't resist sighing and said, "There are many things that we have no choice in." Yi Ling Er stared at him in a daze and suddenly said, "In the past, it was the emperor who pushed you out, but now, teacher, Fan Xian has already taken over your role. Why do you still want to participate?" The second prince sighed again. After a moment of silence, he said, "If it is really as you say, my historical mission has already been completed. I should indeed not participate in these matters, but don't forget." He said with slight mockery, The teacher you speak of, the most famous Sir Fan Jr. in the Qing court, is actually someone who holds a grudge the most. Yiling furrowed her brows slightly and said unhappily, "What grudge can't be resolved? Do you want me to go talk to him?" Although the second prince secretly laughed at his wife's childishness, he was also faintly moved. Pulling her into his arms, he comfortingly said, "There are many grudges between men that can't be resolved through friendship in the boudoir." He didn't explain in detail, but he knew that the grudge between him and Fan Xian would be difficult to resolve. The guards who died on Yalan Street, the Baiwa brothel incident, the dead prostitutes, and many, many more, Fan Xian had placed all the blame on him. This was actually also something the second prince did not understand. It was clear that only some unimportant subordinates had died, so why did Fan Xian hate him so much? In order to protect himself, he had to have power. Of course, the most important reason was that the second prince was still not satisfied, even now. Everyone was not satisfied, but few people knew of Fan Xian's good intentions far away in Jiangnan. I've even read the reviews of the book. Thank you. I just don't have time to add to it. I'm really sorry. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 393. The Crown Prince had been scolded, the scope of the investigation had shrunk, and the Ministry of Revenue was temporarily safe. The Overwatch Council could straighten its back again. This matter was very interesting. Whether or not the first bureau of the Overwatch Council could straighten their backs depended on the angle of the Minister of Revenue's body and the ground. The scholar slammed the table in the Hall of Governmental Affairs and pointed at the faces of the elders of the 6 departments, cursing these officials for their uncleanliness. In any case, he was still young and hot-tempered. He did not need to be like Xu Wu and always put on the bearing and demeanor of a senior official. What the emperor needed was the scholar's reputation and drive. However, in the matter of investigating the Ministry of Revenue, the scholar had not completely satisfied the emperor's requirements. In his opinion, at least from the situation of the investigation, the Ministry of Revenue was truly not easy. What made the scholar most angry was that, even now, some officials in court still could not forget and wanted to find evidence of crimes related to Jiangnan in the Ministry of Revenue's accounts. The sound of slamming the table rang out again. The scholar furrowed his brows deeply and stared coldly at the official beside him. In a low voice, he said, "Moving silver to Jiangnan? Where's the silver? Isn't it still in the Ministry of Revenue's treasury? In the future, if you don't have evidence, don't talk about these groundless things to avoid chilling the officials' hearts." He looked at the ashen-faced officials and snorted coldly. "Sirs, take care of yourselves." After saying this, the scholar shook out his sleeves and walked out of the little room beside the royal palace, leaving behind many officials in the room looking at each other. Everyone felt deep regret and embarrassment. When investigating the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Revenue was clean. On the contrary, it was their faction that had countless problems found. The backers behind these officials were all inextricably linked to Jiangnan. From the situation in Jiangnan, these major figures determined that the silver Fan Xian used to clash with the Ming family had certainly been moved out of the national treasury. It was because of this judgment that these people dared to attack the Ministry of Revenue so confidently. Since so much silver was still stored in the Palace Treasury Transport Company, then the National Treasury would certainly not be able to erase it. Yet, there was not a trace of it. These officials gnashed their teeth in hatred. Even after being reprimanded by the scholar, they did not dare to talk back. Told them to shout so loudly and yet not be able to find any problems? The father and son of the Fan family were too treacherous. It was early in the morning, and the sun in the east had not yet risen. The Hall of Governmental Affairs was only drafting the memorials for the court conference. The expressions of the officials were all a bit tired. Most of them had not slept all night. However, thinking of the fight in the court conference, everyone had to raise their spirits. The first stage of the Ministry of Revenue's investigation had clearly ended with the complete defeat of the eldest princess and the Eastern Palace. But how could they salvage the situation? Intentionally or unintentionally, these officials cast their gazes towards a young official who had been sitting in a dark corner. This young official's name was He Zhongwei. He was one of the most popular people in the court. He had some previous connections with the eldest princess's eastern palace and was now deeply appreciated by the emperor. It was precisely because the scholar did not want to make a big fuss about the Ministry of Revenue that the emperor had many intentions that could not be expressed verbally and could not be smoothly handled through the officials. This was why the imperial censorate's new imperial censor of the left, He Zhongwei, was transferred to the team investigating the Ministry of Revenue. The officials looked at He Zhongwei. Naturally, they wanted to know from this young official's mouth exactly how the palace was going to handle this matter. He had been specially ordered to listen in on matters in the Hall of Governmental Affairs for 3 days. He had been steady and proper. He was respectful and strict toward the scholar and the other officials. He did not say much and did not act rashly. He was deeply steady. However, being stared at by these officials, He Zhongwei knew that he had to show some ability. This was not only for himself, but also for the emperor. "What a mess," he sighed and warmly said to the officials. He sighed and warmly said to the officials, "It looks like this matter will have to be slowly tormented." The scholar was a bit anxious earlier. "Please do not worry too much." Slowly dealing with it showed the palace's attitude. The fan manor's response was clever and unyielding. It made it so that the palace could not find a good way to replace the Minister of Revenue in a short time. They could only wait for another opportunity. The officials fell silent. They were dissatisfied and also faintly worried. Since Fan Jian's position did not change, the officials who had led the attack would have to pay a corresponding price. In the court conference after the matter, the officials belonging to the eldest princess and the Eastern Palace launched a final attack. It was not to kill the enemy, but to protect themselves. Even though the Ministry of Revenue was clean, the investigation team still found some problems. Under the guidance of He Zhongwei, who had joined after the matter, the officials gave up on the shocking crimes and only focused on the small problems in the Ministry of Revenue. For example, some accounts were unclear, or a small sum of silver had disappeared. Although they were all small problems, they at least showed that they were investigating the Ministry of Revenue, not to hold a grudge or take revenge. They truly wanted to find the problems in the Ministry of Revenue. In the court conference, listening to the impassioned accusations of the officials, the scholar smiled coldly in the first position on the left. Shu Wu stood beside him with a face full of worry. The Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu, did not say a word. The emperor sat upright on the dragon chair and looked at a person among the civil officials with a complicated gaze. The Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, had also come to the court conference. The emperor looked at Fan Jian's slightly grizzled hair and sighed in his heart. He opened his mouth and asked, "Where did that 180,000 liang of silver go?" Fan Jian stepped out of the ranks. He did not defend himself or explain. Showing his old age, he bowed and directly asked for forgiveness. The 180,000 liang of silver had long been sent to the river transport governor's yamen. The court immediately burst into an uproar. The Ministry of Appointments and related officials who had strongly advocated investigating the Ministry of Revenue had a flash of joy on their faces. They had no idea why the experienced and ruthless Minister of Revenue would admit in court, in front of the emperor, that he had secretly moved silver from the national treasury to the river transport governor's yamen. They knew this was an opportunity that could not be missed. In an instant, the officials all stepped out and righteously criticized the Ministry of Revenue. They aimed a spearhead at Fan Jian. In this world, only the emperor's edict had the power to move silver from the national treasury. No one else could do so. Fan Jian had the Ministry of Revenue move silver into the river transport governor's yamen without the royal approval. No matter how one looked at it, it was a crime of deceiving the emperor. The emperor stared at Fan Jian's tired face. A faint light flashed through his eyes. It seemed that he did not hear the voices of the officials in court asking for the Ministry of Revenue to be punished. The emperor did not hear it, but some officials heard it clearly. Hearing it, anger filled the depths of their hearts. The deficit in the Ministry of Revenue was closely connected to the officials who attacked the Ministry of Revenue. Even if Minister Fan's move of silver from the National Treasury to the river works was not appropriate, his intentions were understandable. This was for the court and the people, yet it became a sore spot for those shameless people to attack. Shu Wu's brows trembled anxiously. The anger in his eyes flared. He turned his head and glared at the civil officials who had stepped out. In reality, these elders of the Hall of Governmental Affairs all knew that if the court wanted to move silver, the procedures were very complicated. If they really had to slowly ask for an edict to move silver into the river works, the river would probably have long been shore banks. In the depths of winter, Shu Wu had once complained to the emperor about this matter. Although he did not know the details of Fan Jian moving silver from the Ministry of Revenue into the River Transport Governor's Yamen, he dared to conclude that this had nothing to do with personal gain. Bullshit. Moving silver to repair the river? The Fan family had no land on either side of the river. What benefit could they possibly get? Shu Wu forcefully suppressed the anger in his chest and stood out. He bowed to the emperor on the dragon chair. Seeing this virtuous and respected scholar step out of the ranks, the officials attacking the Ministry of Revenue all stopped speaking and returned to their ranks. The emperor glanced at him and said, "What is the crime of secretly moving silver from the national treasury?" Old Shu the scholar raised his head and straightforwardly said, "Your Majesty, if you want to ask about the Qing law, you should ask the Ministry of Justice and Supreme Court. I work in the Hall of Governmental Affairs, but I am not very familiar with the Qing law." The emperor gave a not quite there smile and said, "What does the scholar want to say?" Shu Wu bowed again and turned around to glance disdainfully at the petty officials in the court. Only then did he slowly say, "I think that Minister Fan is not at fault in this matter." "How so?" "The matter of the river works has always been tight. This year, fortunately, the spring floods are not as strong as in previous years, but the summer floods are about to arrive. As for the matter of the Ministry of Revenue moving silver into the river works Yamen," Shu Wu took a deep breath and respectfully said, "It was I who wrote the memorial in the Hall of Governmental Affairs and directly sent it to the Ministry of Revenue. Thus, I actually know about the matter of the Ministry of Revenue moving silver." After these words were said, the court burst into another uproar. Shu the scholar was willing to take a great risk and tie himself to the Fan family? Why was he doing this? Minister Fan also seemed to be surprised as he looked at the old scholar in front of him. The emperor furrowed his brows slightly. A moment later, he suddenly smiled and said, "Oh, why didn't I know about this matter? I am muddle-headed. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Shu the scholar was not muddle-headed. Earlier, the discussion in the court was ferocious, and he could not stand it. The sliver of old but firm conscience at the bottom of his heart surged. His blood rushed and made him stand out to be a guarantor for the Ministry of Revenue. Now that he had come to his senses, he knew the emperor would certainly not like someone in his Hall of Governmental Affairs to be a guarantor for the 6 ministries. He forced a smile and lowered his voice. "Your Majesty, take pity on my old age. Yesterday, I drank a few cups too much and spoke with youthful frivolity. At this time, even if I wanted to shut my mouth, I can't." The emperor saw a dignified scholar playing the role of a clown and couldn't resist laughing. The sliver of unhappiness for being contradicted gradually dissipated. He couldn't strip the Minister of Revenue and a scholar of their positions for a mere 180,000 liang of silver. "Who's Shuji?" the emperor asked with a slight smile. "In your opinion, what crime should the Ministry of Revenue be charged with?" Scholar Hu stepped out. After a moment of consideration, he quietly said, "The crime of deceiving the emperor." There was a buzz in the court. The emperor raised his brows and asked with interest, "Then, how should they be punished?" "Not." Who the scholar lowered his body very low. "Why? The Ministry of Revenue moving silver into the river works is out of the public good and out of loyalty to serve your Majesty. Although it is deceiving the emperor, it is a deceiving of love for the emperor," who the scholar said lightly. Who the scholar faintly said, "When the Qing law convicts people, they care about understanding reason and setting the situation. A clear heart knows the reason and understands the situation. The officials of the Ministry of Revenue and the minister are magnanimous and sincere. Your Majesty, please investigate. Oh, the emperor seemed to be very interested in this saying. He smiled slightly and said, "But the law is here. If we don't act according to the law, how can we pacify the mouths of the people under heaven? How can we pacify the desire of the officials to abide by the law? There is no need to block the mouths of the people under heaven," who the scholar replied in an even voice. "As long as the breach in the dikes of the great rivers can be blocked, the people can see with their eyes, hear with their ears, have food to eat, and have a place to live, they will know of your Majesty's painstaking efforts." The emperor was moved and nodded his head. Who the scholar continued, "As for the officials," a faint, bitter smile suddenly rose to the corners of his lips. "If the officials truly abide by the law, then so be it. In my opinion, although the Qing law is important, it is not as important as a word from the emperor. If your Majesty sympathizes with the hard work of the Ministry of Revenue and deals with them leniently, the officials in court will be grateful." In the end, he quietly said, "Your Majesty, it has been raining continuously recently." This last sentence was said very quietly. Other than a few officials near the throne, no one else could hear it. The emperor sank into deep thought. He knew that the scholars of the Hall of Governmental Affairs closest to him were standing on the side of the Fan family for the sake of the court and the wealth of the Qing kingdom. He furrowed his brows and thought that Hu and Shu did not know his true intentions. They had also been provoked by the matter of Xiohe, which was why they had come out to protect the Fan family. But was his method this time truly inappropriate? Did all the officials in court with some conscience think Fan Jian should stay? His furrowed brows gradually relaxed. Gazing at Fan Jian below, he quietly asked, "I don't want to hear what other people say. Tell me, why did you move the silver to the river transport governor's yamen without my permission?" Fan Jian sighed and took a few steps forward. Bowing to the ground, he replied simply, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid I won't make it in time." This amount of silver was actually a portion of the silver the Ministry of Revenue had sent to Jiangnan. The emperor knew this, and so did Fan Jian. The emperor knew this. In court, he had been attacked by the officials using this as an opportunity. Yet Fan Jian insisted on not defending himself. He did not try to have the emperor share the burden for him. For the benefit of the people, he dared to move the silver from the treasury to Xiohe River. He was truly a rare, righteous official in the Qing kingdom. No wonder he had moved the scholars Hu and Shu. For the emperor's face, he dared to not defend himself in the face of serious crime. He was truly a rare, loyal servant in the Qing kingdom. No wonder the emperor was moved. The emperor thought deeply and then slowly nodded his head. After the court meeting, a clear edict came down. The Ministry of Revenue was in a serious deficit. The emperor was furious and ordered the investigation to continue. The problems that had already been found were handed over to the Overwatch Council and Supreme Court to be responsible for investigating. The Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian, was stripped of his second-rank title, fined his salary, and kept in office. Speaking of which, it was funny. This second-rank title had been added by the palace after Fan Xian had saved the emperor in the Hanging Temple. As for the salary forfeiture, adding on to the salary forfeiture last time, Fan Jian would not receive a salary for a full 2 years. However, he still sat firmly in the position of Minister of Revenue. Correspondingly, the deficit that the Ministry of Revenue had found implicated many officials. A vigorous investigation began. The various powers were forced to cut off their own hands and feet to prevent the deficit the Ministry of Revenue had suppressed for so many years from cutting off their own heads. The Crown Prince's 400,000 liang of silver had been filled by the Empress Dowager's private savings. However, the officials of the other factions did not have such a good grandmother. Regardless of whether it was the Eastern Palace faction or the eldest princess faction, large numbers of officials fell one by one. Some new blood, such as He Zhongwei, began to gradually enter the court. Last autumn, because of Fan Xian's battle with the second prince, a group of officials had already been purged. This late spring, Because of the battle between the Ministry of Revenue and the eldest princess, another group of officials had been purged. Abandonment became the main style in the court for a time. The origin of this story was in Jiangnan. It was because Fan Xian had created this fake situation that the people on the eldest princess's side thought they had caught the Fan family's greatest crime. That was why they dared to throw out so many pawns into this muddy water with the intention of pulling the Jingdo Fan family off their horse. However, no one had thought that the silver had come from Northern Qi. The Fan family did not touch the silver in the national treasury. Of course, the emperor thought he knew that the Fan family had moved with his permission. The emperor thought he knew everything under heaven, but he was wrong. In any case, the Fan family had found a foothold with unusual difficulty, and the emperor's control over the officials increased a bit, making the palace a bit more stable. Everyone was happy. Looking at the present situation, at least on the surface, there was no longer any power in Jingdo that could threaten that chair. For a moment, spring was bright and peaceful. Secretly, the crown prince and the second prince were forced to form a temporary alliance. Although the Fan family had suffered some damage because of this matter, everyone knew that if Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, came back, something big was sure to happen. To be able to force two irreconcilable dragons to unite together, this kind of might and power was enough to make everyone feel proud and elated. However, Fan Xian, who had caused all of this to happen, did not feel the slightest bit proud. For one, it was because news from Jingdo had no way to travel so quickly to the distant Jiangnan. For another, it was because he could beat the princes until they didn't dare to make a sound in Jingdo. However, in Jiangnan, far away from Jingdo, faced with the Ming family that kept retreating, he suddenly found that it was strangely difficult to defeat the Ming family. It was even more difficult than defeating his royal brothers. Happy weekend. Those who have a monthly ticket, vote for one. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 394. The battles in politics and business often had a common point. Every time it looked like they were at the end of the line, it was as if there was a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Just as the oil was cooking the fire, who knew that it would instantly turn into a cold autumn? Xinyang and the Eastern Palace thought they had a clear grasp of the Ministry of Revenue's battle in Jingdo and had grasped the Fan family's biggest weakness. They arrogantly and eerily took action, wanting to have the Fan family's circumference insignia change owners. Who would have thought that in the end, it would be the complete opposite, and they would lose a large amount of power for no reason? Going back to Jiangnan, Fan Xian held the imperial envoy Ming Jian in his hand, cleared out the palace treasury, took control of the transport company, and, through Xia Qi Fei, forced the Ming family's money to tighten. Then, through that lawsuit, he successfully plunged the Ming family into chaos. Then, through the enormous Overwatch Council's help, he made things difficult for the Ming family everywhere under heaven. His manner was overbearing, as if he could crush the Ming family into a pile of powder at any moment. At such a moment, who would have thought that so many shocking things would happen? My people want to enter the garden. Fan Xian slapped the table. His eyes were like hooks as he looked coldly at the person in front of him. Enunciating each word, he said, "Sir Shui, I have already waited 10 days. I will not wait any longer today." The person sitting beside him was the most powerful person in Jiangnan, Governor Xueqing of Jiangnan Road. The place the two of them were having their secret discussion was in the study of the governor's manor. The accounts master of the Juanshan Conference, who was also the Ming family's housekeeper, Zhou, had already been discovered by the Overwatch Council and was currently hiding in the Ming Garden. Regardless of whether it was for the assassination attempt at Jiangnan Restaurant or Fan Xian's strong interest in the Juanshan Conference, the Overwatch Council had enough reason to kill their way into the Ming Garden and drag out that person. However, it was, after all, the Ming Garden, one of the 3 great gardens in the world. It represented the interests of countless people in Jiangnan, countless people's lives, and countless people's hopes. Even if Fan Xian wanted to send people into the Ming Garden to search, he had no choice. He had to first go to the Jiangnan governor's manor to communicate with Xueqing. As long as Xueqing was willing to nod, Fan Xian did not care much about the Ming family or the Jiangnan aristocracy. It was a pity that time was pressing, so he could not send about a Wuzhou first. Naturally, he would not be able to clearly find out what Xueqing's bottom line was from his father-in-law's mouth. Fan Xian could only go straight to the governor's manor and make this seemingly shocking suggestion. Xueqing's attitude was clear. Xueqing's attitude. Yes. Did one of the governor's manor to send people to the investigation? No way. The Jiangnan governor was not afraid of offending the Ming family, but he knew how ruthless it was. The Ming Garden was like a door. In the first few months, he and Fan Xian had been tidying up the Ming family's property outside the door and tormenting the Ming family spirit. They had not touched the Ming family's foundation. Thus, the other party had blindly retreated, endured, and appeared weak. Once the people of the government stepped into the Ming family's high threshold, the proper core of the Qing kingdom did not care about overthrowing a wealthy merchant family, even if this family was the wealthiest in the Qing kingdom. The problem was the Ming family directly and indirectly supported hundreds of thousands of people and affected the lives of most of the common people in Jiangnan. The Ming family did not even need to fight back. As long as this situation came out, the stability of all of Jiangnan would become a major problem. Governor Xueqing looked coldly at the young man beside him. He thought to himself, "You are the imperial envoy. When the time comes and Jiangnan becomes a mess, you could just pat your butt and leave. After you return to the capital, there is still the Emperor, Director Chun, and Minister Fan to support you. But what about me? Will I have to throw all the mess after this onto myself? If Jiangnan is not stable, how can I continue as governor?" Thus, after Fan Xian politely came to the governor's manor to discuss matters, Xueqing firmly refused the request of both sides to cooperate in investigating the case. His words were very clear. Since it was that mysterious Juanshan conference, since it was a problem the Overwatch Council had found from the beginning, and since it did not involve local government, it was fine for his people to help the Overwatch Council clean up on the outside. However, he was not willing to directly enter Ming Garden and cause trouble. This was the way of being an official. Xueqing knew that Fan Xian was not certain of the trouble that could arise from searching Ming Garden, which was why he was dragging him down with him. How could he just obediently go down? It had already been delayed for 10 days, and Xueqing was still not willing to relent. Fan Xian's heart began to gradually become angry. After leaving the governor's yamen, Fan Xian climbed into the carriage. He furrowed his brows and supported his chin with his hand. He began to stare blankly. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and quietly said, "We have people watching the Ming Garden the entire time. I heard that the fourth Ming master hasn't suffered much in the Suzhou government. If we want to enter Ming Garden to capture people, we can do it ourselves. Actually, we don't necessarily need the governor's manor's help. I'm just afraid we will lose some people." Naturally, Ming Garden had its own thugs and even powerful private military forces. Fan Xian had once glanced at the garden from a distance and knew that with some slight modifications, the garden could become a sturdy castle. If the Overwatch Council wanted to forcefully attack it without the help of the Black Knights, it would be a difficult matter. If Xueqing did not nod, the Black Knights would not be able to enter deep into the bustling city of Jiangnan. Entering the garden is not difficult. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. As long as the Ming family is not prepared to rebel, the Overwatch Council can take my personal letter and enter the garden to search. Would they dare to stop us? What castle and military forces? It's all fake. The old Ming matriarch wouldn't dare to move a single person. His face gradually became cold. But if we want to enter Ming Garden to capture people, there are two problems. First, we don't know how many aces there are in the Juanshan conference. If that housekeeper Zhou, who knows the inside story of the Juanshan conference, has not been silenced, will those aces protect him from Suzhou? Second, we can't make too much of a ruckus. The Ming family has already shown weakness for a few months. The atmosphere of sorrow is incomparably thick, particularly after the fourth Ming master was captured and brought into the Suzhou government. The Suzhou government has not been released, and the rumors outside are becoming more and more bizarre. Deng Ziyu listened quietly to the side. He knew what the commissioner was worried about. Presently, all of Jiangnan was saying that the Overwatch Council, under Fan Xian's command, was bullying the Ming family with the intention of taking over their property. It was about to evolve into a story of murder and theft. One had to have a good reason for going against the Ming family. However, the court's reason for dealing with the Ming family had never been straightened out. Thus, in Jiangnan, from the gentry to the common people, they all began to stare at Fan Xian with wary and disgusted gazes. The reputation Fan Xian had built in Jingdou for 2 years had already been greatly polluted. Ming Qingda is a smart person. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "This move of retreating in order to advance is indeed beautiful. It looks like they're only retreating, but we are still pressing forward step by step." In the eyes of the common people, their emotions will always be biased. Furthermore, the Ming family has deep roots in Jiangnan. Their ability to mobilize public opinion is much stronger than our own 8th Bureau. Ever since they knew that housekeeper Zhou was hiding in Ming Garden, the Overwatch Council Palace Treasury Transport Company's attacks on the Ming family became more and more ferocious. The Ming family's property was endlessly harassed and gradually looked like the sun was setting in the west. It looked incomparably pitiful. Public opinion is a very important matter. Reputation is also very important. Fan Xian sighed. If we continue to suppress the Ming family like this, not only will the common people be disgusted with me, even the royal merchants that Xia Qifei is in contact with will probably grow wary of the court. No one knows whether or not they will become the second Ming family. What gives me the biggest headache is... He shook his head. Right now, we are not clear about the situation in the capital. I don't know if we make too big of a move, too many people will die, and too much criticism will be stirred up. Will it give the people in the capital an excuse to move me back? With the situation in Jiangnan still unsettled, Fan Xian did not want to return to the capital, particularly since he would be held back by the women in the palace. It was not a situation he could accept. When the carriage arrived at Hua Garden, he said a few words to the third prince and the others. Then he brought Deng Ziyu and a few trusted aides into the study. He spread out a map on the large desk and began to think deeply. Fan Xian thought for a while and then used his finger to point at a certain city on the map. In a quiet voice, he asked, "Has the news from Chuanzhou come back?" The home of the concubine of the direct heir of the Ming family, Ming Lanshi, was in a village next to Chuanzhou. The Overwatch Council had already investigated that the brother of the concubine had been on the East Sea the entire time. He was responsible for the Ming family's pirate business and robbing their own merchant ships. The head of the pirates had already been silenced by the military people the Ming family had colluded with. The concubine had also disappeared. In the words of the Ming family, she had gone home to visit relatives. Of course, the Overwatch Council knew this was a lie. But who could expose this lie? That concubine did not return to the village, a member of the Chinian unit reported. We didn't find any traces of bandits along the way. They were probably killed in Suzhou. Fan Xian nodded. This was something he had long expected, so he was not surprised. Straightforwardly, he asked, "What is important is that since that village was the pirate's home, there must have been people who followed him onto the island to become bandits. Those relatives must have some understanding of this matter. Since the Ming family had bathed that island in blood, those villagers would not foolishly stand on the side of the Ming family." A glimmer of shame flashed across the face of the member of the Chinian unit. "That village is already empty." Fan Xian furrowed his brows tightly. The village was empty? There was no need to ask for a reason. Since it was empty, it could not be separated from those dirty tricks. What about the families here? His finger was still pointing directly at Chuanzhou. Furrowing his brows, he asked, "The officials of the shipping department were killed by those pirates. When did those families come to the Suzhou government to report?" Another member of the Chinian unit replied in a heavy voice. Most of those families have already returned to the mainland. Only a few are still in Chuanzhou. However, the people of the Fourth Bureau went to ask probingly. Those families received a large sum of compensation. Their desire to pursue the pirates has faded. What is important is the Ming family has indeed treated them well. They did not believe the Ming family would collude with the pirates. Fan Xian was startled. Shortly after, he said with slight mockery, "Of course not collusion. The Ming family is the pirates." Immediately after, he asked a few more about the previous arrangements of the Fourth Bureau and received not very good answers. Only now did he know that after he cut down the Chui family in Jingdou, and during the days when Yin Bingyun was plotting against the Ming family, the Ming family had already made sufficient preparations. They did not leave behind too many loopholes. Fan Xian sat down on the slightly cold chair. In his hands, he held a bowl of warm tea as his thoughts wandered. His subordinate looked at the commissioner in silence, not knowing what to say. It looked like it would be difficult to bring down the Ming family in a short amount of time if he took the open and above-board path. However, he had to use the Overwatch Council's dirty methods. After all, Jiangnan was not other places. He had to worry about the reaction of the people. If it really caused the entire population to take to the streets for a walk, it would be difficult for the Overwatch Council to clean up. Thinking of this, Fan Xian began to feel angry at Xue Qing's indecisiveness. If the Jiangnan governor appeared and he followed from behind, one in the light and one in the dark, one red face and one white face, perhaps this matter would be much simpler. However, Fan Xian did not feel too defeated. He knew that in the battle between the court and the Ming family could forever only stand on the passive defensive side. Fan Xian had plenty of time to slowly play with the Ming family. The reason he was in a hurry to enter Ming Garden was because he wanted to clearly investigate the role of the Junshan Conference. In the battle with the Ming family, he could endlessly try to bring them down. Even if he did not succeed once, he could try again after resting for a while. But the Ming family could not. This large family could not be defeated even once. Once they were defeated, they would be wiped out. Get ready. Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "Get ready to enter the garden to capture people at any time." Deng Ziyu hesitated for a moment and then said, "Not waiting for Governor Xue to make his stance clear." Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "When I do things, I never like to follow in other people's footsteps. I waited for 10 days and given Xue Qing enough face. If I act now, he can't blame me for being ruthless." What about the Jiangnan people's discussion? Discussion? They say I'm bullying the Ming family? I'll go in gently and gently. I won't hit a single person and won't kill a single person. How am I bullying them? A glimmer of a smile appeared on Fan Xian's face. Besides, I've thought it through. Something like reputation, once it's ruined in Jiangnan, I'll slowly pick it back up in the future. Fan Xian waited for 10 days not because he did not have the confidence to enter Ming Garden and capture Housekeeper Zhou. It was not purely because he had misgivings about discussion or because he wanted to wait for Xue Qing to make his stance clear. More importantly, he was waiting for news from Jingdou. After the palace treasury bidding, he knew clearly that the eldest princess faction in Jingdou would launch an attack on the Ministry of Revenue. He was waiting for the result of this matter. The matter was in Jiangnan, but the commander was in Jingdou. As long as the situation in Jingdou was unclear, it would be difficult for Fan Xian to act in Jiangnan. The next day, birds cried out from the willow branches. 3 fast horses charged into Suzhou under the cover of dawn. The bailiffs guarding the city only knew that the people coming were secret agents of the Overwatch Council and did not dare stop them. The sound of hooves thundered as they charged outside Suzhou's Hua Garden. Someone had long led the 3 riders into the garden. This was the Overwatch Council's fastest way to send news. It was many times faster than the Qing Court's courier service. Fan Xian held the council report Mu Tai had sent from the capital and was slightly happy. He knew that the result of the matter was as he had guessed. The Ministry of Revenue was fine, and the eldest princess side had suffered a great loss. However, as intelligent as he was, he could clearly see that the emperor wanted to use the opportunity to have the old fan family in Jingdo leave the stage. His slightly happy face immediately darkened. However, he didn't have time to think about his father's matter. Fan Xian shook his head and said to the Overwatch Council official beside him, who had been receiving orders the entire time, "Enter Ming Garden and arrest them." The Overwatch Council official accepted the order and left. For a moment, a number of officials came out from the yamen all around Suzhou. The hooves of horses shattered the silence of the morning. Outside the city, 40 or so Overwatch Council officials rode openly and directly toward Ming Garden under Deng Ziyu's lead. "Be careful," Fan Xian turned his head and warmly said. "No one knows who else the Juanshan Conference has left in Jiangnan." Lady Haitong's two hands were in the large pockets of her flowery clothing. She tilted her head and smiled. Early in the morning outside Suzhou, after the early birds chirped once, they returned to the trees to sleep. It was quiet all around the road, particularly around the beautiful and spacious Ming Garden. One could only hear the faint sound of water being poured and washing coming from inside. Everything was the same as any other day. Suddenly, dozens of riders came galloping along the road. The people on the horses were all wearing the robes of the Overwatch Council. Following the arrival of these dozens of riders outside the Ming Garden, the secret agents of the Overwatch Council, who were responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the Ming Garden, also appeared from the trees and behind the mountain. Some of them merged into their colleagues who had come to inspect the garden, while some of the spies disappeared without a trace. Deng Ziyu's serious face sank as he rode his horse to the front gate of Ming Garden. He flipped down from his horse. His subordinates behind him also dismounted in unison. At this moment, Ming Garden was as quiet as a shy virgin. However, Deng Ziyu could clearly see that on the inner side of the low perimeter wall, there was a metallic light shining with a soul-devouring light. On the high ground to the left, he could see longbows and crossbows. The other party was already waiting in formation. If they fired in unison, not a single one of these dozens of Overwatch Council officials would be able to return alive. However, Deng Ziyu's expression did not change because he believed in the commissioner's judgment. Although the Ming family were bandits in their bones, they would not be stupid enough to initiate a firefight when faced with the Overwatch Council. As expected, the front gate of Ming Garden was slowly pulled open. The young master of the Ming family, Ming Lanshi, whose eyes were slightly red and who seemed to have not slept all night, stood respectfully by the gate. He spread out his right hand and said, "Everyone, please. My condition this week has not been right. My writing has been rather rough. There was a chapter at the beginning that I was not very satisfied with. Everyone knows that I am a person who is easily affected by emotions. My apologies. The day before yesterday, I received news that a cousin of mine passed away. She was not more than 40 years old. I have a feeling that life is impermanent and do not need consolation. Perhaps it is relief. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 395. Report. The carriage stopped 2 streets away from the Suzhou government. The Tiger Guards cautiously watched the movements around them. An Overwatch Council secret agent wearing commoner clothing leaned over and examined the token. He moved closer to the carriage window and spoke in a quiet voice. In the carriage, Fan Xian was holding something and reading it closely. He nodded and said, "Speak." Ming Garden has not resisted. The people of the 4th Bureau have already gone in and are currently searching. For now, there are no results. Fan Xian thought for a moment and then said, "Pay attention to propriety. Tell Ziyu not to be too arrogant." The secret agent made a sound of acknowledgement and turned to leave the carriage, disappearing into the morning crowd in Suzhou. The carriage slowly began to move again. It had traveled half a street in the direction of the Suzhou government. Another Overwatch Council secret agent flashed out from the corner of the street and came to the side of the carriage. Lowering his voice, he reported, "There are no unusual movements at the docks." Fan Xian was silent and waved his hand to let the person go. From Hua Garden to the Suzhou government, They had to pass through half of Suzhou. Along the way, the carriage moved silently and did not attract much attention. Most of the people of Suzhou did not know that this morning the Overwatch Council officials had already charged into Ming Garden like wolves and tigers. During this distance, the crows that the Overwatch Council had temporarily mobilized began to report news from all sides. All of the information related to the Ming family's response was gathered into this moving carriage. For example, the situation in Ming Garden, the situation of the Ming merchant house opening as usual, and the response of the governor's yamen. All of it was sent as quickly as possible into the carriage and handed over to Fan Xian for him to consider. In other words, this carriage was the central tent of the Overwatch Council's operation. Fan Xian also felt a glimmer of strangeness. Even if the Ming family was showing weakness, they could not be bullied to the point where they had not made any moves to retaliate. On the contrary, it was the governor's yamen that was beginning to grow nervous. There were already rumors of troops being mobilized. In today's plan, seeing the Ming family's response was one thing. Capturing the housekeeper Zhou was the most important. During these few days, Ming Garden had been under the Overwatch Council's close surveillance. Housekeeper Zhou should not have had any chance to escape. Most importantly, the Ming family still did not know that the news of housekeeper Zhou hiding in Ming Garden had already been grasped by the Overwatch Council. Thinking of this, a self-mocking smile rose involuntarily to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. In this world of large families, if they fought their way in from the outside, they would always be like a centipede with 100 legs. They would not die immediately, but if they fought from within, then they would face true difficulties. This was something Chao Shuiqin had said in Dream of the Red Chamber. The reason he had such a sign now was because the place housekeeper Zhou was hiding was a member of the Ming family. A very powerful person within the Ming family had told Fan Xian through some channel. Otherwise, given the tight defenses of Ming Garden and the fact that the Overwatch Council had not successfully placed a spy from the upper echelons in a dozen years, how could they have calculated that housekeeper Zhou was in Ming Garden? As long as steward Zhou was in Ming Garden, today's matter could be considered a success. The carriage gradually approached the Suzhou government. Another secret agent from the Overwatch Council came to report some news. There was nothing else strange. The carriage entered an unremarkable little alley and leaned against a thick wall, stopping there. No one knew what it was doing. About 100 feet to the side of the Suzhou yamen was the prison that held the prisoners. The prison killed people in the autumn and raised them in the spring. Right now, it was a time of prosperity. There were 40 to 50 people locked up in one prison. Going in through the iron gate of the prison, all the way to the end of the straight path, there was a place where sunlight shone down from above, slightly warming the place and dispersing some of the dampness. Compared to the other dark and sunless prison cells, this place was much more comfortable. This prison cell was padded with hay. Under the hay, one could faintly see forbidden blankets and the like. A middle-aged man was drinking alone with a deathly pale face, enjoying a treatment that normal prisoners could not enjoy. This was the fourth master of the Ming family. Because the Overwatch Council wanted to defeat the Ming family, he had become the first person to be used as a sacrifice. He had been forcefully locked up in the Suzhou government. It had already been a dozen days, and there was still no news of him being let out. However, the Ming family was, after all, a large and powerful family. It was as if the Suzhou government was being raised by them. Living in the prison, there were people taking care of everything from top to bottom. His days were considered comfortable. In the prison cell next to him were a number of great bandits. They all looked at him with envious gazes. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was too lazy to pay attention to those bandits. He only narrowed his eyes and looked at the 3 bailiffs outside the prison door. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips, and he said, "What is it today?" The prison door was opened with a clang by the bailiffs. One of the bailiffs bowed and smiled charmingly. "Fourth master, it's been hard on you these days. However, the Overwatch Council is keeping a close eye, so it's not easy for us to arrange a single room for you." The fourth master of the Ming dynasty shook his head and sighed. Being able to get out earlier is the proper thing. Did the family say anything? At this moment, two other bailiffs had already brought in good food and good wine. They laid it out in front of him, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was slightly surprised. It was not even lunchtime yet. So why had they come so early to deliver food? Suddenly, he thought of something. His expression couldn't help changing dramatically. In a raspy voice, he said, "What do you mean? After eating this meal, you should be on your way." The bailiff sighed. The fourth master of the Ming dynasty's face was deathly pale. He didn't quite believe his ears. He thought to himself that at most, he was a tyrant and did not deserve the death penalty. Furthermore, he was a member of the Ming family. How could the government dare to casually kill him? He unconsciously retreated and looked hatefully at the bailiffs. Viciously, he said, "What do you mean? I don't understand." The bailiffs lowered his head slightly and said, "It is the Overwatch Council's meaning. Fourth master, please don't blame me." The fourth master of the Ming dynasty was not a foolish person. After thinking for a moment, he understood the whole story. After a moment of silence, he smiled wretchedly and said, "What Overwatch Council? I'm afraid the family wants to kill me." The bailiffs straightened his body and lowered his voice. "Since you understand, then don't mind it too much. It's not for the good of the family. The Overwatch Council is pressuring the family tightly. I heard they already entered the garden this morning. If we don't do something and make a ruckus, how could the Overwatch Council be willing to stop? You are the fourth master. Using your life to temporarily ensure the safety of the family for half a year is worth it." The fourth master cursed angrily. "You bastards. If you want to die, why don't you let the old matriarch die? Aleph *CK her ancestors." He had already reached a moment of life and death. Of course, he knew why the Ming family would send people to kill him. This was certainly not to silence him. He had no idea about the core business of the family. This was just a stroke of ink smeared on the face of the Overwatch Council. From the end of last year, the Ming family had planned to show weakness and sorrowful battle. They needed to use the death of the fourth master of the Ming family as the opportunity to explode. Thinking of this, his heart was filled with despair, dissatisfaction, and anger. The expression of the bailiffs changed, and he said, "The old matriarch is the protector of the Ming family. Fourth master, please be more respectful with your words." The fourth master smiled wretchedly and retreated to the corner of the wall. Cursing and swearing in his mouth, he said, "I am also a master of the Ming family. Why must I die? Just because I am not her biological son?" Two bailiffs had already walked to the side of the fourth master. Completely ignoring his cursing and resistance, they took out a ball of dirty rag and stuffed it into his mouth, blocking his filthy words. At the same time, they tied his hands behind his back. The ruckus in the inner room had startled the entire prison. Many prisoners looked over with curiosity and fear. The leading bailiffs furrowed his brows and shouted, "The Overwatch Council is doing business. Everyone be quiet." Even though they were locked up in prison, these prisoners knew that the Overwatch Council was currently suppressing the Ming family. No one had thought that the Overwatch Council would go deep into the prison to assassinate the fourth master. They couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts and gradually felt injustice for the Ming family. However, no one dared to glance in that direction for fear of bringing trouble upon themselves. The bailiffs looked at the plate of food in front of him and shook his head. Regretfully, he said, "You can't even eat your last meal well. It has been hard on you." After saying this, he waved his hand. The two bailiffs holding the fourth master took out ropes and wrapped them around the fourth master's neck. The fourth master's neck was tied, and his face was red from the suffocation. His feet stomped endlessly on the ground, sending the hay flying everywhere and dirtying the quilt below. The ropes became tighter and tighter. The fourth master's eyes seemed to bulge out of their sockets. His nostrils flared wide. He looked strangely terrifying. The strength of his feet stomping also became weaker and weaker. He was like a dying frog, bouncing weakly. One could imagine the hopelessness in the heart of the dying fourth master. One could imagine the hatred he felt toward the old woman of the Ming family and Ming Qingda. However, he was already going to die. What could he do? The bailiffs, looking coldly at the dying fourth master, suddenly felt strange. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the cell nearby. The prisoner was looking at him. The prisoner was looking at him coldly. It did not seem like he was cold-blooded watching the spectacle. There was also not a glimmer of fear. He turned around in astonishment and saw the prisoner take out something from the pile of hay and aim it at him. A crossbow. Shing, shing, shing. 3 crossbow noises rang out. 3 crossbow bolts flew out and accurately pierced the throats of the 3 bailiffs. The 3 of them clutched their throats. They didn't even have time to make a sound before they fell to the ground. Their feet stomped twice and they died. Once the bailiffs died, the ropes loosened. The already dying fourth master's powerless feet gradually regained strength. He slowly opened his eyes and glanced at the prisoner next door with a confused and muddy gaze. He didn't know why the other party had saved him, nor did he see clearly how the other party had saved him. The prisoner seemed to have done nothing. His eyes were looking straight ahead as he crouched by the bars. The fourth master's entire body was sore and weak. His pants were wet and smelly, but he knew he had escaped death. At this moment, the thick wall behind him, as if it was being manipulated by a ghost, quietly opened up a hole, revealing the clear blue sky outside. Gauda pulled back his long knife. His face was slightly pale. Forcefully breaking through the thick walls of the Suzhou government prison had also used up a lot of his jinshi. He entered the prison cell, picked up the fourth master with one hand, and left the prison. Another Overwatch Council official entered and pulled out the crossbow bolts from the throats of the 3 bailiffs. He then carefully arranged the situation in the prison cell before walking to the side of the bars and extending his hand. The prisoner who had saved the fourth master's life earlier did not say a word. He handed the hidden crossbow in his hand to the Overwatch Council official's hand and pointed at the food box beside him. The Overwatch Council official picked up a chicken leg and placed it in his hand. The prisoner smiled with satisfaction. The Overwatch Council official lowered his voice and said, "Wait another 2 months. Sir still needs you as a witness." The prisoner nibbled on the chicken leg and nodded. Not long after the Overwatch Council official left, the prisoner flicked the rest of the chicken leg into a cell diagonally across from him. Suddenly, his face changed, and he cried out in a shrill voice, "Help! Save me! Someone is killing and breaking into the prison." The carriage left the small alley behind the Suzhou government and slowly drove toward the governor's yamen. However, there was now an extra person in the carriage. The fourth master sat paralyzed in fear under the carriage chair. He raised his head to gaze at the young and handsome figure and was speechless for a moment. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. Rich and powerful families are indeed always filthy and dirty. Shortly after, he smiled slightly and said, "Now that you've seen it clearly, I don't need to say more. In the future, you have to grasp the Ming family well and work well with the seventh master." The fourth master swallowed. The scene of him narrowly escaping death had given him too much psychological impact. It did not allow him to think at all. He nodded his head fiercely. Fan Xian said in a quiet voice, "The old matriarch wants to kill you and blame it on the Overwatch Council. She wants to spread it to the people and create an image of me as shameless and cold-blooded. She wants to stir up the emotions of the people to protect the Ming family. But now that I've saved you, she has instead blamed the Ming family for breaking into the prison. What do you think she will do?" The fourth master's eyes were lifeless. He shook his head and endured the pain in his throat. In a hoarse voice, he said, "Sir, don't underestimate that old be asterisk. So, my condition is not just a problem of my mental state. I've caught a cold, a bad cold. Hissing pain. I've written less, but the quality seems to be better. My satisfaction is rising." To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 396. Regardless of whether you should be dead right now or have been kidnapped by the Ming family, Fan Xian sat in the carriage and looked outside. Fan Xian sat in the carriage and looked outside. In a quiet voice, he said, "In any case, during this period of time, it is impossible for you to appear in front of people again. The council has already arranged a place for you. Hide well and come out after this matter is settled." The fourth master weakly made a sound of acknowledgement. Fan Xian turned his head and glanced at him. He couldn't resist shaking his head. "When I asked Seventh Ming to meet you, you should have agreed. Why did you have to suffer such a fright?" The fourth master gritted his teeth and said in a raspy voice, "No one would have thought that mother and son would be so ruthless." Fan Xian shook his head somewhat helplessly. For such a large family to survive, they need many sacrifices. The fourth master fell silent. His hand touched his red, tight, and aching throat. He knew that he was nothing more than a sacrifice and didn't have much right to ask for anything. When the carriage was halfway through its original journey, another carriage picked up the fourth master from Fan Xian's carriage. Only Fan Xian and a few people from the Chinian unit were left in the carriage. The 7 tiger guards followed Gao Da's arrangement and scattered around the carriage, concealing their tracks. "Sir, where do we go next?" the subordinate asked in a low voice. Fan Xian thought for a bit and then said, "Wait another hour and send an invitation to the governor's manor. I want to see Xueqing again." His gaze landed on the subordinate's face and asked, "Has the arrangement in the prison been completed?" The subordinate said in a low voice, "Yes. Furthermore, the Suzhou government has people watching. The Ming family cannot escape the crime of breaking into the prison. Only speak directly." Fan Xian furrowed his brows. "I don't understand. If the Ming family wanted to kill the fourth Ming master and frame the council, there was no need to do it so exaggerated." Fan Xian shook his head. "The method is not important. What is important is the timing. Today, the Overwatch Council entered the Ming Garden to search. The fourth master died in the prison. No matter how he died or how the Ming family arranged the aftermath, as long as he died and someone found his body, all of the Jiangnan gentry and common people would think it was me who did it." He smiled and said, "The Ming family have been waiting for me to lose my patience and enter the Ming Garden so they could throw out this abandoned pawn. However, now that the fourth Ming disciple is not dead, I am truly curious. How will the Ming family continue to play the tragic card?" The carriage slowly came to a stop. The morning sunlight of Suzhou City gently and warmly shone on the long street, shining on people's hearts, and then on the roof of this black four-wheeled carriage, as if to brush away the coldness in the hearts of the people sitting inside. Estimating that Ming Garden was already in a commotion, Fan Xian lifted the curtain and got off the carriage. The tiger guards gathered around and walked toward the tall governor's yamen. An official of the Overwatch Council had already handed over a name card, so the yamen gatekeeper did not dare to stop them. An advisor hurriedly walked out and welcomed them in. It was still in that study. There was still only Governor Xueqing and Imperial Envoy Fan Xian. Fan Xian very straightforwardly expressed his intentions and informed the other party that the Overwatch Council people had already entered Ming Garden. Hearing this reality that had already happened, the corners of Governor Xueqing's eyes furrowed imperceptibly. He then sighed and slowly said, "There are many things that cannot be done quickly. Going down to Jiangnan to deal with the Ming family was the Qing Emperor's established policy. Fan Xian was only a specific executor. As the Emperor's trusted aide, Xueqing knew the origins of this matter. However, in terms of specific measures, he was very different from Fan Xian. The court did not set a timetable for taking in the Ming family. For the Emperor, he believed he still had a lot of time and enough patience to slowly eat up the large clans in Jiangnan. Correspondingly, Xueqing did not want to act in too much of a hurry. He had always been conciliatory in order to avoid making too much of a ruckus, messing up Jiangnan, and shaking the foundation of the court's rule. Thus, Xueqing's mood was not very good regarding the matter of Fan Xian directly entering the yamen and saying he had already entered Ming Garden. He still did not understand why Fan Xian was in such a rush. He was clearly a young noble, not even 20 years old. What was there to be afraid of wasting a few years? There was another glimmer of anger in his chest. He understood that Fan Xian's action was to force him onto the boat to take a knife. The Overwatch Council had already entered Ming Garden. If the two sides fought, as the governor of Jiangnan rode, he had to ensure peace no matter what. Then, he had to do what he needed to do. A few days ago, Xueqing had not relented because he did not have much confidence in dealing with the Ming family. Furthermore, he was afraid of the rumors in the capital. Now that he had been played by Fan Xian, his anger gradually rose. In a low voice, he said, "If trouble arises, who will be responsible?" Fan Xian thought quietly for a moment and then seriously said, "There shouldn't be any trouble." Xueqing glanced at him coldly and said, "It's not that I'm being arrogant, but no matter how you look at it, I am still one of your elders. You didn't handle this matter carefully enough. The Ming family has already shown weakness for half a year, waiting for you to bully them. Now that you have already bullied their way in, how could they miss this opportunity?" Fan Xian shook his head. "Once we've entered Ming Garden, what can they do?" Xueqing lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "Although the court has always known that the Ming family keeps 1,000 private soldiers, they have always turned a blind eye to the service they have performed for the court. It was not difficult for a large family of tens of thousands of people to use all kinds of names to raise 1,000 private soldiers." However, Fan Xian couldn't help smiling coldly when he heard these words. "Is it for the court or for the Junshan Conference?" Hearing the words, Junshan Conference, Xueqing fell silent. For such a mysterious and limitless power organization to appear in the Jiangnan under his rule, it had to be said that he had failed in his duty. The emperor had already severely reprimanded him in the secret letter he had sent. Xueqing understood that Fan Xian was using the name of the Junshan Conference to pressure him. He could only helplessly shake his head and say, "Where exactly are your plans?" Fan Xian was silent for a moment and then said, "The Ming family was prepared to kill the fourth Ming disciple and plant it on the Overwatch Council. I stopped this matter." In the Suzhou government, Xueqing was slightly startled. Only now did he understand why Fan Xian appeared to have a card up his sleeve. 1,000 private soldiers. As long as the Ming family does not raise the flag and rebel, I will only send 40 people in, and they won't dare to move. Fan Xian continued to smile slightly and said, "Don't they like to play retreat in order to advance? I want to see just how far they can retreat." Xueqing half closed his eyes and said, "They really won't dare to move? What you have is not an imperial edict." Fan Xian responded with equal harshness, "I have not taken an imperial edict, but I have the emperor's sword." Xueqing lightly said, "As long as a few more people die in the Ming Garden and adjust their emotions, it is not impossible for them to bury your 40 Overwatch Council secret agents in the Ming Garden." The emperor's sword? The Ming Garden can find enough excuses to argue that they did not know of this and only thought that Sir Fan Jr. of the Overwatch Council wanted to kill and steal property, so they were forced to retaliate. Don't forget, the Ming family has laid the groundwork very well these few months. For something like this to happen at this time, everyone under heaven will believe them. These words stabbed into Fan Xian's heart. If the Ming family was truly forced into a corner, it was not as if they could not do such a crazy thing. Given the Ming family's foundation in Jiangnan and support in the capital, they could completely shed all pretenses of cordiality with Fan Xian. Furthermore, the Overwatch Council had entered the Ming Garden first. Even if the two sides fought openly, public opinion would completely fall on the Ming family's side. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian did not seem to care about this at all. There was not a trace of emotion on that young and handsome face. Xueqing couldn't help but furrow his brows. Fan Xian finally opened his mouth. There was a faint self-mockery at the corner of his lips. "The Ming family is waiting for me to act, and I'm also waiting for the Ming family to act. As long as we shed all pretenses, if they actually dare to touch my subordinates, no matter what, I will frame them as rebelling. Regardless of whether the people under heaven believe it or not, I will place this hat on the head of that old Ming matriarch." To say such a perverted thing in front of the governor, Fan Xian could not be said to not be daring. However, His following words made Xueqing feel a glimmer of coldness. Naturally, no one would believe they would rebel. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "However, once we act, the Black Knights that have been staying in Jiangbei will come. I will kill everyone in the Ming Garden. As long as everyone in the 6th branch is dead, who will cry out for them? The Jiangnan people or the Jiangnan gentry?" He continued to calmly say, "Even if they cry out for their grievances all the way to Jingdou, so what? Even if they file a lawsuit before the emperor, so what? I have killed everyone in the 6th branch. There is only Xia Qifei left. At most, there will be the 4th Ming prince as an ornament. The court will still have the Ming family property in their hands. As long as the goal is reached, it doesn't matter if the methods are dirty." He turned his head and stared into Xueqing's eyes. "I trust that if 40 people of the Overwatch Council died, and I moved the Black Knights of Suzhou, you wouldn't still stop me, would you?" Xueqing's pupils constricted slightly. If things really developed like this, and the Overwatch Council threw in 40 officials, and he still had to forcefully stop the Black Knights from going south, he was afraid that the Overwatch Council would truly fly into a rage and anger the old man in the wheelchair. Even if he was the governor, he probably wouldn't have a good end. Looking at Fan Xian's warm and pure eyes, Xueqing felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. He had a completely new understanding of the young official beside him. It turned out that Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council was indeed a powerful figure who killed without blinking. The way the younger generation did things was indeed sufficiently crazy. What about you? After massacring Ming Garden, Fan Xian would not have a good ending. However, Xueqing still did not believe that Sir Fan Jr. would gamble with the Ming family on this. Me? At most, I'll have all my titles removed, lose my official position, and be demoted to a commoner. At the very least, banished 3,000 li away? Fan Xian seemed to be thinking about his own end and laughed out loud. "It's not like you don't know. I can go anywhere in the world." Xueqing couldn't resist shaking his head and sighing. "Then the 40 subordinates you sent into Ming Garden, were they all abandoned?" Fan Xian closed his eyes and shook his head. "Not so. I'm only talking about the worst ending. However, I believe that given the shrewdness of the mother and son of the Ming family, they would certainly not make such a choice. Thus, I am very curious. How exactly is the Ming family prepared to deal with this? It's like playing cards. I don't think I'm going to win this round, but I'm very curious as to what card my opponent is going to play." He opened his eyes and said with a smile, "Sometimes I have the curiosity of a gambler. I am also beginning to become curious." Xueqing's eyelids jumped slightly. "I hope your judgment is not wrong. The Juanshan Conference accountant surnamed Zhou is still in Ming Garden. Don't worry," Fan Xian encouraged the governor. "I have people in Ming Garden." Xueqing furrowed his brows. He didn't know who exactly Fan Xian was hiding in Ming Garden. Given his identity, it was not convenient for him to ask, so he closed his mouth and didn't say anything more. The two leading figures of the Jiangnan officials sat silently in the study, waiting for news from Ming Garden. They didn't have to wait for long before the news came. The advisor of the governor's manor moved closer to Xueqing's side and whispered for a while. Xueqing fell silent. He then gazed at Fan Xian and sighed. "The cards the other party has played seem to have exceeded your expectations. I'm going to start moving troops." Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. Xueqing continued to smile bitterly and said, "Moving troops is for the safety of your subordinates and not to prevent you from massacring the garden." Xueqing knew he didn't need to explain it to him in detail. His face was still full of shock as he hurriedly left the study. Fan Xian stood and heard the whole story from the mouth of the Qinian unit member outside the door. The Overwatch Council's news should be faster than the governor's manners. After all, he was in the manor, so the message was sent slower. After Fan Xian heard of what happened in Ming Garden, he still couldn't help but be like Governor Xueqing. A shocked expression appeared on his face. His mouth opened slightly and he sighed, "Ruthless, even more ruthless than what I did." He was prepared to curse out to vent the absurd feeling in the depths of his heart. In the end, he endured it. He smiled bitterly and shook his head. His expression gradually became calm. He then gave out an order. Have Deng Ziyu pull everyone back. Don't retaliate when hit. Don't retaliate when scolded. Recently, all of her attention had been focused on dealing with the Overwatch Council's all-pervasive coercion. She had long drawn up a corresponding plan. On this beautiful morning, hearing that the Overwatch Council secret agents had entered the garden to search, the old woman's face was filled with anger. She cursed. After Ming Garden was built, how could there be a government search? Even if the governor enters the manor, he has to maintain etiquette. These bastards of the Overwatch Council. The little courtyard she lived in was far away in the deepest part of Ming Garden. She could not hear the clamor of the Overwatch Council searching in front of her. However, this feeling of humiliation still made her angry. Narrowing her eyes, she said, "You plan to let our family be bullied like this?" Standing beside her was the current master of the Ming family in name, the eldest son of the eldest branch, Ming Qingda. His face was slightly ashen. He knew what his mother meant and replied in a small voice, "He is already gone." However, after all, fourth is still a brother. The old Ming matriarch glanced at her son coldly and with disgust. She thought, if you are not ruthless, how can you accomplish great things? How can you allow your family to struggle at death's door under the Overwatch Council's powerful attacks and endure until the day the capital turns the tables? You have to be ruthless. The old Ming matriarch lectured. Ming Qingda glanced at his mother's wrinkled face. A filial smile appeared on his face, and he made a sound of acknowledgement. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 397. The Overwatch Council broke into the garden like this today for Sir Zhou. Ming Qingda glanced at his elderly mother and said evenly, "Do you want to?" The old Ming matriarch glanced at him coldly and knew what he meant. Housekeeper Zhou was the head housekeeper of the Ming family and the accountant of the Juanshan Conference. This person was too important. If the Overwatch Council found him, many of the inside stories of the Juanshan Conference would be grasped by Fan Xian and indirectly by the Emperor. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of Ming Garden's self-protection or for the safety of the Juanshan Conference, Housekeeper Zhou would undoubtedly die. The problem was, the old Ming matriarch sighed gently and said, "It's not like you don't know that this Sir Zhou was sent to our home by the eldest princess. To kill or not to kill, we cannot make a decision. The search is about to reach the back," Ming Qingda said expressionlessly, but a glimmer of cold laughter flashed through his heart. Juanshan Conference? How could an organization of that level be something a wealthy merchant family like the Ming family should be involved in? As expected, they were now riding a tiger and couldn't escape even if they wanted to. He always had a deep prejudice against the old Ming matriarch and the eldest princess for tying them so tightly. As for the Juanshan Conference, he avoided it even more. The old Ming matriarch slowly closed her eyes and said, "Don't worry. Sir Zhou's safety should be no problem." The old woman suddenly furrowed her brows and said hesitantly, "There's one thing I still don't understand. Why is the Imperial Envoy so sure that Sir Zhou is still hiding in Ming Garden? If he can't find him, how will he explain it to the people under heaven?" Ming Qingda's heart thumped, but a similar expression of confusion floated to his face. The old Ming matriarch thought for a bit and felt a bit tired. She shook her head weakly. Her white hair made her appear old. "I'm tired," the old woman said with disgust. "Don't let those Overwatch Council dogs disturb my rest." "Don't worry, mother." Ming Qingda walked to her side and placed his hands on her shoulders as if preparing to help her up. Evenly, he said, "In the future, no one will disturb your rest." The old Ming matriarch turned her head in shock and saw the flash of guilt, fear, and ferocity in her son's eyes. Then her mouth was covered, and a leather rope was tied tightly around her throat. The old Ming matriarch wanted to cry out, but she couldn't. Her hands were held tightly by her own son. She could only kick her feet forcefully. That pair of small feet bounced randomly and made popping noises. The old woman's eyes flashed with endless fear and resentment as she stared at the principal made not far away from her. She did not know how many trusted aides she had in the mansion, but at this moment, none of them were by her side. She did not know where they had died. The servant girl glanced at the old Ming matriarch and slowly turned around. The leather rope around her throat became tighter and tighter. The old Ming matriarch could not breathe. There was a burning pain in her chest, and her eyes began to blur. She knew that everyone had betrayed her. Compared to the betrayal, the strong and thick sense of regret and hatred was even harder to suppress. It flowed out with her tears and saliva from the corners of her mouth. You have to be more ruthless. Of course, sacrifices are needed to achieve great things. All the words rang out again in that instant, accompanied by the ringing in her ears before death, striking the old woman's heart. Her eyes bulged out and stared fixedly at her own son in front of her. Ming Qingda lowered his head and grabbed her hands without making a sound. Perhaps after a long time, or perhaps it was only a short moment, the chest of the old woman sitting in the grand chair, the old Ming matriarch who had secretly influenced and controlled Jiangnan for a dozen years, made a muffled sound. Her body abruptly went limp. Her legs drooped weakly under the chair and no longer moved. When one was old, one should rest. The Overwatch Council's search of Ming Garden did not proceed smoothly. Although no one dared to stop him, Deng Ziyu could already feel the anger in the eyes of the people in Ming Garden growing stronger and stronger. Furthermore, the guards and thugs watching him in the dark could pull out their weapons and charge at him at any moment. Searching the house did not have any gentle methods. Along the way, they overturned chests and cabinets, shouted harshly, and entered people's boudoirs. This appearance indeed had the aura of a vicious wolf. At the same time, it aroused the hostility of everyone in Ming Garden. However, Deng Ziyu was not worried. Commissioner Fan had him enter the garden, so he must have been confident. As expected, although the people in Ming Garden looked at him with loathing and hatred, no one dared to stop him. However, Ming Garden was too big. After searching for a long time, he had only searched half the area. He could not find any trace of housekeeper Zhou's whereabouts. "I want to search the back garden," Deng Ziyu said to the young master of the Ming family, Ming Lanshi, who had been by his side the entire time. "No." Ming Lanshi stared fixedly into his eyes and scolded. "What exactly do you want to do? Do you really think the Ming family is so easy to humiliate? There were women and relatives living in the back garden. How could it be easy to search?" Ming Lanshi used this as a pretext and angrily scolded the Overwatch Council officials. However, Deng Ziyu's face was heavy. He refused to back down even a step. In his hand, he held the official document personally written by Fan Xian. On it was the seal of the Imperial Envoy. There was sufficient reason to search. Of course, he could not do it in the name of the Overwatch Council. He could only do it in the name of the Jiangnan Road Imperial Envoy. It had to be known that the Overwatch Council could not interfere with local government affairs, and, particularly, could not arbitrarily judge civil matters. Today, they were playing a trick of selling dog meat under the sheep's head. It could be said that Fan Xian had borrowed soldiers. The two sides faced off at the door leading into the back garden. The servants and guards in Ming Garden had endured for a long time. At this time, they finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Profanities came out one after another and cursed endlessly. Under their agitated emotions, the thugs and private soldiers that should have been hidden to the side also appeared and surrounded the nearly 40 Overwatch Council officials in the center. Deng Ziyu's face darkened, and he coldly said, "Young Master Ming, are you going to continue searching, or are you going to defy the edict?" The imperial envoy's journey represented the emperor's edict. Who dared to defy it? Ming Lanshi's face alternated between green and white. He gritted his teeth tightly and pretended to be humiliated and embarrassed. A moment later, he roared angrily, "Go search. The heavens have eyes. I don't believe that the Overwatch Council will not get retribution for bullying people with power." Deng Ziyu did not care about all this. His hand grasping the hilt of the padao, he strode toward the back garden. Unexpectedly, he had not gone more than 10 steps when a person charged out. Although the person was wearing the clothes of a serving girl, looking at the quality of her clothing and attire, she was also an important figure in Ming Garden. The serving girl's face was deathly pale, and her eyes were lifeless. It was as if she had seen a ghost. She crazily charged toward the crowd. As she charged, she yelled indistinctly, "Dead! Dead! Dead! Dead!" Deng Ziyu's heart jumped. He felt some kind of inauspicious omen. He furrowed his brows and stopped the serving girl. In a stern voice, he asked what happened. The serving girl's face exuded the temperament of a noble family she usually cultivated. However, at this moment, she seemed to be in too much of a shock. It was completely miserable. She trembled for a long time and couldn't say a complete sentence. She could only tremble endlessly in front of Deng Ziyu. If Deng Ziyu had not held on her arm, she would probably have collapsed to the ground long ago. The people from the Overwatch Council searching the garden did not recognize this serving girl, but the people of the Ming family knew her identity. They knew that she was the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl and one of her trusted aides. At this moment, the people of the 6th branch were all gathered here. Seeing her like this, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They wondered what had happened. Ming Launcher anxiously snatched the serving girl from Deng Ziyu's hands and grabbed her by the collar. "What is it? Who died?" Deng Ziyu watched from the side with cold eyes. A strange light flashed through his eyes. The serving girl was shaken by the young master and finally came to her senses. She opened her mouth but didn't have time to say anything. First, she wretchedly cried, "Oh, young master, the old matriarch, the old matriarch, what happened to the old matriarch? The old matriarch, she's gone." The serving girl struggled to finish this sentence. Her head tilted, and she fainted in Ming Launcher's arms. It was like Ming Launcher had been struck by lightning. He stood dumbstruck where he was. For a moment, he couldn't believe his ears. The surrounding disciples of the 6th branch of the Ming family looked at each other with wide eyes and gaping mouths. They were frozen like countless frogs. It was as if they didn't know how to use a shocked expression to express the feelings in their hearts. The old matriarch had gone. The old matriarch had gone. In the deathly, silent garden, after an indeterminable amount of time, the first cries suddenly exploded out. Immediately after, the cries rose up like a grand chorus. The cries, wretched cries, and painful curses rose and fell. Many people fell to the ground in shock, unable to stand up no matter how hard they tried. The entire Ming Garden was completely enveloped in shock, grief, and anger. Other than the 4th Ming master in the Suzhou government prison and the old Ming master at the old matriarch's side, there were also the masters of the 4th branch present. These 4 men cried and howled. They pushed aside Ming Launcher's dazed body, lifted the robes in front of them, and charged toward the back garden. At this time, no one cared about the rule that one could not enter the back garden without permission. Without anyone needing to shout, the hundreds of people who had appeared in Ming Garden rushed to the back garden with tears in their eyes as they followed the sound of crying like a cloud. The Overwatch Council officials in the center looked at each other and became the most awkward group of people. Deng Ziyu's pupils constricted slightly. He felt danger. He had come under orders to search the garden, but he had not thought that it would turn into such a situation. Although it was not clear how the old Ming matriarch had died, Deng Ziyu knew that her death was too clever and coincidental. It was so clever that the Overwatch Council had no choice but to take responsibility. In that instant earlier, he had seen Ming Launcher's expression out of the corner of his eye. It made a question grow in the depths of his heart. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death shocked everyone in Ming Garden. The guards all charged out and rushed to the side of the Overwatch Council people and surrounded them. They held weapons and crossbows in their hands, and a hateful gaze flashed through their eyes. Deng Ziyu furrowed his brows slightly. He knew that if one of the measures was not taken properly, it would result in a fight between the two sides. However, the commissioner had told him very clearly that the matter should not continue like this. He made a prompt decision and ordered his subordinates, the Overwatch Council officials, to also enter the back garden. In any case, Ming Garden was in chaos. No one had time to worry about them. Furthermore, the Ming Garden private soldiers holding weapons and watching him could not immediately act where the old Ming matriarch was about to die. After walking into the back garden for a long time, Deng Ziyu followed the sound of crying. Outside a quiet and secluded courtyard, he looked at the kneeling people on the ground and couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Sweeping his gaze, he saw that in the large central room, under the thick beam, there was a person tied under a long white cloth. It was an old woman. The old woman's hands hung by her side with the tips of her feet pointing to the ground. Following the gentle spring wind, she floated in midair. This scene was as strange as it could be. In particular, the pair of eyes that refused to close were protruding outwards. Her pupils were filled with the blood that had been forced out when she was dying. They were filled with hatred and unwillingness as they looked outside. Coincidentally, they were looking at the Overwatch Council officials outside the courtyard. Deng Ziyu was shocked by the gaze of these two dead people. He hurriedly turned his neck and gave an order for his subordinates to be on guard and prepare to break out at any moment. Crying filled the courtyard. The people on the ground knelt and cried blood as they kowtowed endlessly. The old Ming matriarch was completely dead. Ming Garden would certainly hold this debt on the Overwatch Council. At such an impassioned time, no one knew what would happen. However, the way out in the back had long been blocked by Ming Garden's private soldiers. Filled with hatred, it would be extremely difficult to kill their way out. Not long after, Ming Qingda, whose forehead was already bleeding from kowtowing, and the brothers of the fourth branch untied the old matriarch's body from the beam. The current master of the Ming family forcefully suppressed his sorrow and made arrangements for the funeral. Only then did he lead the four brothers out of the courtyard. No one dared to speak, but everyone stared at the Overwatch Council people outside the courtyard with that kind of gaze. In Deng Ziyu's life, he had never found so many people who wanted to eat his flesh. The gazes of the Ming family already displayed this kind of hatred. He knew that this was not the time to retreat. Once he retreated and the news got out, it would bring great danger to the Overwatch Council. Although there were people injured, there were immediately people from the inner circle who took over. With great difficulty, they maintained the defensive circle and successfully repelled the first wave of the Ming family's private soldiers' attack. But how long could they last? The sixth master was about to go crazy and yelled with all his might. A light slap rang out. The sixth master's face was slapped. He turned his head in shock and saw his older brother's face, which was still sorrowful but mostly angry. Ming Qingda lowered his voice and gritted his teeth. You want the entire clan to accompany you in death. Without waiting for the stunned sixth master to reply, Ming Qingda's face darkened and he yelled, All of you stop. His voice was not very loud, so many people did not hear. An excited flush appeared on Ming Qingda's pale face. He raised his voice and yelled, Do you want to rebel? After all, he was the nominal master of the Ming family. Particularly after the old Ming matriarch's death, the word nominal could be removed. Thus, with Ming Qingda's order, all of the Ming Garden thugs stopped and retreated. The crowd opened up a path. Ming Qingda walked coldly along this path until he was in front of the people of the Overwatch Council. The master of the Ming family looked coldly at Deng Ziyu like he was looking at a vicious dog waiting to die. Deng Ziyu did not show any weakness. He smiled coldly and said, Master Ming, you asked a good question. Are you really preparing to rebel? Ming Qingda's gaze carried a glimmer of desolation and disdain, but he still did not say anything. How could the Ming family respond at this time? Kill the 40 Overwatch Council officials in front of them? Then, without waiting for an edict from Jingdo, Sir Fan Jr., sitting in Suzhou, as well as Governor Shui, could mobilize troops at any time to destroy Ming Garden. But they had forced his mother to death. All of this doubt and painful psychological struggle appeared on Ming Qingda's face and fell into the eyes of the Ming family and Overwatch Council officials. Big brother, the sixth master cried as he rushed to Ming Qingda's side. Mother has been forced to death. We can't let these lackeys leave alive. After the people in Ming Garden gradually calmed down, they seemed to be able to understand the sadness and struggle in the old master's heart. The sixth master was no exception. However, the love between mother and son was deep. How could he endure this? The humiliation and pain you have inflicted on the Ming family. Ming Qingda's lips trembled slightly. His face was pale. He stared into Deng Ziyu's eyes and said, "The Ming family will return it tenfold. As for today, if you kneel and kowtow to the old matriarch to ask for forgiveness, I will let you leave the garden." The sixth master didn't quite believe his ears and anxiously said, "Big brother, we can't just let it go like this." On the contrary, it was Deng Ziyu opposite him who narrowed his eyes and thought for a moment. He then said, "Master Ming, you should know that the Overwatch Council kneels to the heavens, to the earth, and to the ruler. We will not kneel to anyone else." Ming Qingda's brows furrowed. It seemed that his spirit had been greatly damaged by the repeated attacks today. He could not stand steadily. With great difficulty, he held onto the sixth master's shoulder, but he also stopped the sixth master's impulsiveness. In a raspy voice, he said, "Then let us all perish together." As he spoke, Deng Ziyu felt that Ming Qingda's gaze on him seemed to be trying to express some hidden meaning, but he could not figure it out. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He had not expected that the Overwatch Council would be so unyielding. In the face of such a dangerous situation, they were not even willing to make some superficial concessions. The confrontation continued. The situation could explode at any moment. There were always two clever people among the six masters of the Ming family. Seeing that the situation was not right and hearing their big brother's words of perishing together, they felt a glimmer of fear. As merchants, how could they have the right to perish together with the court? Throwing an egg at a rock, putting on such an appearance would not cause the rock to lose anything. Furthermore, he was not the old Ming matriarch's own flesh and blood. Why should he pay with his life? Thus, the second and third Ming masters surrounded him with impassioned and sorrowful expressions on their faces. They leaned close to Ming Qingda's ear and spoke quietly. They advised the old master to prioritize the lives of tens of thousands of people in the family and to temporarily endure. When it came time to avenge the old matriarch, they had to plan slowly. Ming Qingda had personally killed the old matriarch, so he already had a guilty conscience. The paleness on his face was not purposely faked. In such a situation, he had to act as if he had an irreconcilable enmity with the Overwatch Council and could not coexist. At this moment, with the second and third Ming masters coming out to persuade him, his heart felt slightly more at ease. He put on an expression of struggle and pain. After an indeterminable amount of time, they suddenly heard a clamor outside the garden. Immediately following, it was the sound of horse hooves. Countless people and horses had charged in. Ming Qingda's heart trembled. He thought to himself that the Overwatch Council's Black Knights were clearly still in Jiangbei. It was impossible for them to have charged into the garden at this moment. Who were the newcomers? Thousands of soldiers galloped in on horseback. Long spears stood in great numbers. The military might was impressive. Immediately, they separated the Ming Garden's private soldiers from the Overwatch Council officials. For a moment, dust gradually rose, and the atmosphere was imposing. The people who came were the provincial soldiers the Jiangnan governor had sent over. Using an urgent order, they rushed quickly and finally arrived before the disaster happened. They stood between the two groups of people with swords drawn and bows drawn. The leader was a general. He already knew what had happened. With a serious expression, he said something to Ming Qingda. He had wanted to go in and pay his respects to the old Ming matriarch, but he knew that Ming Garden had not been set up yet. Furthermore, the old Ming matriarch had died too. Well, he could only give up. Following the provincial soldiers into the garden was a member of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council. He moved closer to Deng Ziyu's side and told him the two sentences the commissioner had said. Deng Ziyu was startled for no reason. He thought that it would not be a problem to retreat. With thousands of provincial soldiers here, Even if the Ming family wanted to act, they would not have the ability. The problem was, wouldn't this confirm the matter of the Overwatch Council hounding the old Ming matriarch to death? He didn't quite understand what Fanxian was thinking. The best response right now was clearly to bring in the Black Knights and use this as an excuse to destroy the Ming family. However, the arrival of the provincial soldiers protected the lives of the Overwatch Council officials and prevented the possibility of the Black Knights massacring the garden. As for the cause of the old Ming matriarch's death that Deng Zi you had long suspected, only the Suzhou government had the right to investigate. The Overwatch Council did not have this right. Furthermore, the government officials in Jiangnan were all people of the Ming family, so it was impossible for them to find any problems. Thus, he became more and more confused. How exactly did the commissioner arrange this? Were they still going to capture housekeeper Zhou? Were they going to allow this matter to continue developing like this? In the depths of spring, Suzhou was wrapped in silver. It was not snow, but it was colder than snow. Almost all of the Suzhou people wore mourning clothes. The snow-white strips of cloth were like icy imperial edicts, narrating the old Ming matriarch's benevolence and achievements toward the Jiangnan people. The news of the old Ming matriarch's death spread throughout Jiangnan in almost a night. The specific circumstances of her death were passed around from different people's mouths and became more and more bizarre. Regardless of which version of the news, the spearhead was pointed at the Overwatch Council. The anger of the people began to accumulate, but they could not find an outlet to vent it at the moment. The Overwatch Council Yamen had always been secretive, so there was temporarily no heroic scene of tens of thousands of people closing their doors to demand justice. As for the Hua Garden where the imperial envoy was, there was a heavy guard. The people did not have the courage to demonstrate for now. Thus, everyone could only wear mourning clothes and use the grief and anger on their faces and the bitter curses of the marketplace to express their silent protest. This was directed at the Overwatch Council and also at Sir Fan Jr. The old Ming matriarch's mourning hall had not yet opened, so the officials and nobles who had come from various places to offer their condolences were temporarily staying in Suzhou. All of Suzhou was enveloped in a cold atmosphere, completely different from the spring scenery around it. However, Fanxian did not care about this. His skin was thick enough, his heart was black enough, and his spirit was strong enough to watch the scene of the city in mourning as if it were a movie from his previous life. As for the curses directed at him in the open and in the dark, he could completely ignore them. He sat on the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Xinfeng restaurant and was only worried about Haidang. That day, Haidang had gone to capture Mr. Zhou of the Juanshan conference for him and still hadn't returned. He didn't know if she was in any danger. Thinking of this, he couldn't help smiling self-mockingly. The only people in this world who could harm Duo were those great grandmasters. He picked up his bowl and slurped down a few mouthfuls of noodles. He sighed with satisfaction and then said, "Master Ming, I've been tricked badly by you this time." Ming Qingdan knelt by his side and repeatedly kowtowed. In a fawning voice, he said, "Sir's thoughts are as agile as the long river, and your aura is as lofty as a mountain. How would you care about these little winds around you?" To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 398. Torrential River Water? The Yellow River Flooding? Rise. Now you're the true master of the Ming family. You don't have to be so careful in front of me. Fanxian used an amused gaze to examine Ming Qingda. He then picked up the bowl of noodles and slurped it down. Ming Qingda had secretly come to Xinfeng restaurant and avoided everyone's eyes and ears. He was incomparably careful and nervous. After all, at this moment, an atmosphere of grief and indignation was accumulating in Suzhou. The tens of thousands of people in the Ming family were all looking at him, the master of the family. If people knew that he had secretly come to see the imperial envoy, he would probably not be able to continue being the clan leader. The problem was, after seeing him today, Imperial Envoy Fan Xian still refused to give a clear answer. This made Ming Qingda feel a glimmer of strangeness in his heart. Fan Xian put down the bowl and thought for a bit. Let's not talk about anything else for now. I only want to ask you, the Mr. Zhou you promised me, where is he now? Ming Qingda felt the coldness and coercion in the Imperial Envoy's words and unconsciously lowered his head to defend himself. That person, I was unable to control him and let him out of the garden. This was my mistake. Please punish me. Punish. Fan Xian laughed self-mockingly. Now that you've done this, how can I punish you? Ming Qingda sighed and said, even now, do you still not believe in my sincerity? Fan Xian shook his head and said, last time in the palace treasury courtyard, I had already said it. Hold the bowl like a dragon spitting out pearls. Use chopsticks like a phoenix nodding its head. Eat until you're 80% full, and if you can't finish, take it away. Being a person and doing things is the same as eating. Your posture has to be beautiful, and you have to know your limits. He stared into Ming Qingda's eyes. In our agreement, you sold people to me and acted as a mediator, but it did not involve the contents behind. You did not report this matter to me and did it yourself. The present situation puts me in a difficult position. Ming Qingda was silent for a moment and then quietly said, now that things have come to this, in order to prevent the Ming family from turning into smoke and clouds in my hands, some people blocking the front must rest. I trust that you can understand. Understanding is one thing, but doing this without my permission is another. Don't think that by borrowing my subordinates to enter the garden and taking advantage of the situation, you can completely cover up this matter. You have to know that I have paid a great price in this matter. Presently, the entire Jiangnan is watching me. Think about how you will cover up this matter. Ming Qingda was speechless. A moment later, he said, this is Qingda's fault. I will think of a way. Fan Xian nodded. In truth, he didn't really trust this ruthless old fox in front of him. Ming Qingda saw the Imperial Envoy's expression relax slightly. Only then did he gather his courage and say, sir, there were people in Ming Garden surrounding and attacking Overwatch Council officials. This matter should be investigated. Fan Xian listened to these words and couldn't resist smiling. Not only was this old Ming master ruthless, his skin was also as thick as his own. He sighed and said, if these words were heard by outsiders, I don't know how scared they would be. The master of the Ming family is actually urging the Overwatch Council to investigate Ming Garden. Ming Qingda smiled slightly and said, if I don't do this, how can I make you believe in my heart? Relax. Fan Xian calmed down. My identity and position are different from yours. You have no way of handing Sir Zhou to me, but I will still do what I promised you. I will handle 6th Ming, so don't worry too much. However, he stared into Ming Qingda's eyes and said forcefully, it's still the same words as before. You tricked me this time. Now, everyone in Jiangnan wants to eat my flesh. You have to think of a way to deal with this matter. Otherwise, you know the consequences. Ming Qingda bowed sincerely and accepted the order. He then carefully asked, what about 4th? Fan Xian was silent and did not reply to his question. Ming Qingda sighed in his heart. He knew that the Imperial Envoy had to leave a few more weaknesses in his hands before he could be at ease in letting him sit in the position of the master of the Ming family. As for the matter of the 4th master's prison break, the Overwatch Council had witnesses and could throw them out at any time to beat him to death. Fan Xian glanced at him with a not-quite-there smile. He thought, how could a chess piece like the 4th Ming master be taken out now? If he didn't pursue the matter of the prison break, then the 4th Ming master would be useless. If he did, then the 4th Ming master would just die. Wouldn't it be a pity to die like this? Right now, your family's emotions are still agitated. Don't worry about the matter of cleaning out the old matriarch's trusted aides, Fan Xian warned. He suddenly smiled and said, you're better at this kind of thing than I am. My words are a bit unnecessary. Ming Qingda quickly and respectfully said, it is all thanks to the Imperial Envoy's guidance along the way. Don't say that. The corner of Fan Xian's mouth twitched, and he stopped him. The last powerful move was not something I could think of. Also, Fan Xian said quietly. Fan Xian said in a quiet voice, "After the matter has calmed down, you can make arrangements for Xia Qifei to return to his ancestral home." Ming Qingda abruptly raised his head and looked at Fan Xian with a pair of calm eyes that carried complicated emotions. A moment later, he faintly said, "Sir, you still don't trust me." "Say less of these pompous words," Fan Xian said. "You know, and I also know, you don't trust me. Naturally, I also don't trust you. Xia Qifei is the one I truly trust. As long as he doesn't enter the Ming garden to discuss matters, our agreement cannot be considered complete." The wrinkles on Ming Qingda's forehead appeared to deepen. He took a deep breath and said, "Qing Cheng and I had disagreements when he was young. I'm afraid he hates me to the bone. Fine, according to the Imperial Envoy's orders, I am willing to back down. However, the old matriarch has just passed away. This is a time when emotions are running high. Everyone knows that Qing Cheng is your trusted aide. For him to return to his ancestral home, I'm afraid I won't be able to suppress the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in the clan." Fan Xian shook his head and straightforwardly said, "What time is this? Everyone in Jiangnan hates me. Do you think I care about the backlash from the tens of thousands of people in your clan? This situation was created by you. Naturally, you will have to settle the backlash from the people in the clan. I only want the result. As for the process, that is something you should worry about." Ming Qingda's expression darkened slightly, and he said, "This matter is truly difficult." "There is nothing difficult about it." Fan Xian looked at him mockingly. "I have always admired your methods. Since the old matriarch has already been buried, the Overwatch Council has no right to investigate anything. However, I have always sent people to keep an eye on the grave. Making things difficult for you is better than making things difficult for me. If I am truly troubled to an unbearable point, then you should be troubled for the rest of your life." The Overwatch Council already had enough information on Ming Qingda. If Ming Qingda had other thoughts before Fan Xian's days were good, Ming Qingda would certainly be the first to be cut into pieces. Since things had progressed to this point, Ming Qingda knew that although his shrewd and ruthless plan had allowed him to sit in the position of the true master of the Ming family, he had also sat on a volcano. In particular, the last move he had hidden from the Imperial Envoy. Although it made it so that the Overwatch Council could no longer pressure the Ming family, it had truly angered Fan Xian. Fan Xian tore off all pretenses and began to make naked threats. Faced with this kind of naked threat, Ming Qingda knew he could only accept it completely. He had done so many treasonous things. He had not expected that in the end, it would all benefit the other party. He raised his head angrily and looked at the Imperial Envoy. "Sir, good plan." Fan Xian was not angry at all. He chuckled and said, "The old Ming master likes to scheme against others. Now he thinks he has been schemed against by me. Naturally, he feels uncomfortable. However, don't think too highly of me. In this area, I truly do not have much talent." His voice became cold. "One can be strong without desires. The old Ming master has asked for too many things, so naturally, he will give me too many opportunities. As for scheming, I have always thought that such things as schemes are never as terrifying as direct power. After scheming, I have instead ruined your life. Old Ming master, in the future, it is best to be more honest and do things more sincerely." Ming Qingda fell silent. "You can go back first. There are still many things I need you to deal with, such as the resentment the people in the clan have toward me that I need you to appease," Fan Xian said with a smile. "If there are any arrangements in the future, I will send someone to let you know." He thought for a bit and finally warned, "I know you are very afraid of the Juanshan conference, however, for now, don't tear off all pretenses with them. I need the Ming family to still have a position in the Juanshan conference." Ming Qingda knew there was no other way. He could only agree like this for now. He stood up and walked down the stairs. However, his back was slightly hunched, revealing his old age. After Ming Qingda left, the head of the Qinian unit of the Overwatch Council, Deng Ziyu, flashed out from behind the curtain. The shock on his face could not be hidden no matter how hard he tried. Only now did he know that the commissioner and the master of the Ming family had made so many secret agreements in private. Following Fan Xian's orders, he sat down. Deng Ziyu opened his mouth wide and stared blankly for a while before he organized his words. Unexpected, truly unexpected. Fan Xian couldn't resist shaking his head. What unexpected? Ming Qingda is a clever man. He knows this is the court's intention. He does not hope to be able to oppose the court. He only hopes to use a relatively peaceful method to protect the livelihood of the tens of thousands of people in the Ming family. And on this point, he and his mother have an unbridgeable gap. Under these circumstances, if he doesn't come to find me, who can he find? Of course, I still underestimated him. Fan Xian sighed. I didn't think he would play such a game in the end. Thus, the Jiangnan people are all watching us. Xueqing is also greatly shocked. Regardless of which way the court leans, it makes it impossible for us to continue pressuring the Ming family. On one hand, he colluded with the government to stabilize his position as the master of the Ming family. On the other hand, he secretly acted ruthlessly to stir up the emotions of the common people and protect the Ming family's temporary interests. This Ming Qingda indeed did not disappoint me. However, he didn't calculate one thing. He used me, and I used him. The problem is, I have much more confidence than he does, so in the end, he can only be used by me. Everyone miscalculated one thing. Fan Xian explained seriously. Including what I said to Xueqing, it was all to scare him. You all think I can wipe out the Ming family at any time. In reality, this is impossible. That is why I need to use Ming Qingda. Deng Ziyu looked in shock at the thoughtful commissioner. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again. Slowly, he said, if the Ming family truly rebelled, what could I do? Would I really move the Black Knights into Suzhou to slaughter the garden? Yes, I could wipe out the sixth branch of the Ming family, make the blood flow like a river, and cover the field with corpses, but what benefit does this bring me? He smiled and shook his head. After a period of cleansing, relying on the power of the court, and adding the accusation of rebellion to Ming Garden, within half a year, the entire Jiangnan would be as silent as cicadas in winter. No one would dare to say anything. The court would smoothly take over the Ming family's enormous property. Everything would go according to the emperor's plan. His face became cold. But what benefit does this bring me? Deng Ziyu was silent. The commissioner had repeated, what benefit does it bring me? Twice, and had unconsciously pitted himself against the emperor's plan. This made his heart feel cold, but he didn't dare say anything. He understood that if they truly slaughtered Ming Garden and created such a terrifying storm, although the emperor would certainly admit to framing the Ming family for rebellion, in order to appease the Jiangnan people, the Overwatch Council would certainly be severely punished, and the commissioner would not have a good time. To work for the court and take the Ming family into the national treasury. Yet he had to give up his own benefits. Fan Xian would not do such a stupid thing. This is why at the beginning, I had to find Xia Qifei, then the fourth Ming disciple, and finally Ming Qingda. Fan Xian explained in an even voice. The situation in Jiangnan appears chaotic, but it is actually very clear. Xueqing is the emperor's trusted aide, watching from the side. I could only muddy the waters a bit more. Taking in the Ming family can only be done peacefully. Fan Xian slightly lowered his eyelids. If I do too much, the emperor could throw me out at any moment. You should understand this. Deng Ziyu felt a chill in his heart. He didn't understand why the commissioner kept referring to himself as His Majesty in front of him. He didn't understand why the commissioner would tell him such taboo matters. Was he testing him? The old Ming matriarch has always been an important figure in the Juanshan conference, Fan Xian continued. As long as she was on the throne, it was impossible for the Ming family to be taken down peacefully by me. Although her death has brought me some trouble, overall, I am willing to accept this result. Fan Xian looked into Deng Ziyu's eyes and quietly said, You've always been by my side. Of course, you know it has not been easy for me. Deng Ziyu sighed in his heart and bowed without saying anything. Fan Xian walked to the railing on the top floor of Xinfeng restaurant. Narrowing his eyes, he looked at the people in mourning on the street below and the incense shops working hard in the distance. He knew that all of Suzhou was busy for the old woman who had died. Countless nobles had already gathered here, waiting to go to the mourning hall to pay their respects. Deng Ziyu followed behind him and looked at the scene below. He sighed and said, "There are too many ways to deal with the Ming family. The current situation does not seem to be the best." Fan Xian calmly replied, "So, Ming Qingda's last move against me. I'll get it back in the future." In the present Jiangnan, the old Ming matriarch had mysteriously died, and Ming Qingda had secretly thrown his lot in with Fan Xian. On the surface, the Ming family in Xinjiang might still be able to guarantee something, but in secret, it was very different from previous years. Fan Xian held down the fort in Jiangnan. With both hands open, the palace treasury's smuggling business would be carried out with great fanfare. Without the Ming family holding him back, it would go much more smoothly. When all was said and done, the price Fan Xian paid was nothing more than the illusory word of reputation. In his view, forcing the old Ming matriarch to death had thrown the hearts of the people into chaos. The emperor would certainly find some reason to give an edict to reprimand him. He was very happy to bring shame to himself like this. In reality, there were a lot of inside information that affected Fan Xian's decision-making that he did not tell Deng Ziyu. For example, why he could not move the Black Knights and why he was afraid the emperor would throw him out. Fan Xian knew very well that in the present world, it was already an anomaly for such a young and powerful official like him to appear with such great power. Although the emperor still trusted him very much, who knew when the emperor would suddenly change his mind? Judging from the emperor's actions these years, he was a suspicious person. Thus, he had always watched him strictly to prevent him from getting involved with the military. Move the Black Knights into the province? Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly. Even if he used his but to think, he knew how many people would be afraid once such a ruthless method was displayed. The recent disturbance in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital made Fan Xian even more clearly see that before the emperor made up his mind to eliminate the eldest princess power, he had already begun to be wary of the existence of the old Fan family. In Jingdou, the emperor did not use the matter of the Ministry of Revenue's deficit to successfully force his father to step down. Who knew if the Ming family matter would be blown up and he would take away his power? The word power appeared simple, but it was like a drug. Once consumed, it was difficult to get rid of. Although Fan Xian was clear-headed, he could not bear to reduce the power in his hands. For one, he was used to the benefits of power. For another, in order to protect himself and others, he needed the power in his hands. Taking a step back in order to advance, he would first let his reputation be damaged. Deng Ziyu followed beside him and lowered his voice. Recently, the situation has been tense. Based on the 8th Bureau's opinion, perhaps you can condescend to offer a few sticks of incense. Given Fan Xian's identity as the imperial envoy, if he went to offer sacrifices to the old Ming matriarch, it could clearly ease the present situation. However, Fan Xian only shook his head with a cold expression and said, "There's no need." Deng Ziyu was slightly startled. He didn't understand why. Fan Xian extended his hand and pointed at the grief-stricken commoners in the street. In a quiet voice, he said, "Actually, the hearts of the people are not scary. What is scary are those who stand above the people and can use the hearts of the people. As long as I can satisfy those people, what the people think will not affect the overall situation." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 399. It began to rain again in Suzhou. It was said that the rain upstream of the Yangtze River was even heavier. The attention of the court officials was focused on the section of the river embankment above Shazhou that was riddled with holes. Even though Fan Xian was in Suzhou, his gaze could not stop from falling there. Yang Wanli had long gone to take up his post in the river transport governor's yamen. The palace treasury had transferred money, and the national treasury had also arrived. The money for the river transport had never been as plentiful as this year. However, the time to repair the river this year was too late. No one knew if it could withstand the summer floods. The rain fell heavily. The summer heat that had just arrived in Jiangnan was immediately drenched. All that was left was a cold sense of the end of spring. For the people of Jiangnan, this rain only increased the melancholy and grief in the depths of their hearts. Not many people thought of the homeless people upstream of the Yangtze River who had no houses to live in and no clothes to wear. The old Ming matriarch's funeral was about to begin. Fan Xian watched all of this coldly and had no reaction at all. After Deng Ziyu, his subordinates, including the governor's manor, the Overwatch Council, and the Palace Treasury Transport Company, all advised him that it would be best to light a stick of incense in the morning hall. The imperial envoy had expressed his stance. Given the Qing people's reverence for the court, they should not continue to make trouble. However, Fan Xian stubbornly refused this suggestion. In his opinion, it was just the funeral of an old man. What was the big deal? It was just the death of one person. If the matter upstream of the Yangtze River was not handled well, who knew how many people would die? All of the officials sighed in despair at the imperial envoy's stance. They wondered if the imperial envoy did not feel the undercurrent surging among the people. At the end of the month, the sound of mourning filled Ming Garden. White cloth hung high, and the mourning hall was spacious. It was the 7-day period for the coffin to stop. After the 7-day period, it was time to announce the funeral. According to the funeral rules of Qing Kingdom, after 7 days, the news of the funeral had to be spread to friends, family, and even enemies. Regardless of what enmity there was between the two parties in life, the rule of announcing the funeral could not be avoided. The original intention of this ceremony was to erase all enmity with death. Often, enemies in life would use the news of the funeral to personally go to the mourning hall to offer their condolences. It was the same as ending the wrongs in life. From then on, they would be separated by yin and yang and have nothing to do with each other. In the end, Xueqing helplessly asked, "If we incite the people to surround the garden and not leave, where will the court's face go?" Fan Xian coldly said, "Surrounding the prince with evil intentions. If you still don't move your troops, I will." Xueqing was startled. Only now did he remember that there was still a third prince living in Ming Garden. If he allowed the people of Suzhou to surround Hua Garden and the news got back to Jingdou, he wouldn't be able to be the governor anymore. The leading scholars would probably have to pay with their lives. As the Jiangnan governor, he did not dare to allow such a terrifying thing to happen within his jurisdiction. After thinking for a moment, he sincerely asked, "What should we do?" Given Governor Xueqing's shrewdness and experience, taking care of a few hot-blooded scholars was a small problem. Most importantly, he understood that this was clearly an atmosphere Fan Xian had purposely created. Without knowing what Fan Xian's true intentions were, there was no need for him to forcefully interfere and sink himself into this mess. Fan Xian glanced at him and said, "They are all hot-blooded young people. I don't want to make things difficult for them. However, this continuous rain will make it cold at night. Their hot-blooded hearts will also go cold, so naturally they will disperse." Xueqing's brows furrowed slightly. "And if they don't disperse?" Fan Xian smiled coldly. "Righteous indignation cannot be eaten. If they don't disperse at night, then it means that some of the people surrounding the garden are not acting out of righteous indignation, but have other goals. The goal those people hiding in the dark wanted to achieve was simple. They didn't need to incite a civil revolt. They just needed to make the people's reactions bigger and have the matter travel back to Jingdou. The emperor would have to respond." Xueqing thought for a moment and immediately understood Fan Xian's meaning. He said, "Should the governor's manor take action in this matter?" Fan Xian shook his head. "This is a matter of bad reputation. I'll take responsibility for it myself." "Sir, just look after Hua Garden. After all, the third prince's safety is of the utmost importance." Xueqing understood. He couldn't help but feel a glimmer of strangeness and shock in his heart. According to the common sense of officialdom, the matter of suppressing a civil revolt had to be done together by everyone above. However, Fanxian's solitary and stubborn appearance did indeed reduce the pressure on him. After the discussion ended, Xueqing took his leave. Fanxian sat alone in the study in a daze. Shortly after, he couldn't resist smiling self-mockingly. Hiding had been gone for many days and still hadn't returned. If he couldn't capture Sir Zhou, then the Ming Garden coup would mean he had lost 1/3 of the benefits. As for the angry Suzhou people, Fanxian didn't care at all. With Ming Qingda leading, the matter would certainly not go beyond the critical line of intensification. The problem was, it was clear that behind this mass movement, there were many shadows of people hiding in the dark. Without anyone instigating, how could the cowardly citizens of the Qing court have the courage to come to the imperial envoy's manor and raise their voices? Concerning this matter, Fanxian had already made ample preparations. Now that he had Xueqing's reply, his heart was even more at peace. The matter was indeed as Fanxian had expected. When the sky darkened, the crowd outside had gradually dispersed. There were only the students with square headscarves on their heads, their faces full of righteousness, and a few unknown citizens mixed together. With the governor's manor's military watching, these people could only stand at the end of Chong Street and chant, angrily accusing the imperial envoy of treating human life like grass and harming the Jiangnan people. No one knew who started it, but the crowd gradually became excited and pressed toward Hua Garden. For a moment, the governor's manor's soldiers did not dare to act ruthlessly and slowly retreated. As they got closer and closer to Hua Garden, the crowd stopped. There was a clamor of voices, and all kinds of ugly curses were thrown out. However, the students are not all idiots. They knew that cursing was one thing, but they were all cursing about the Overwatch Council and did not touch upon Fanxian's 18 generations of ancestors. Everyone under heaven knew that Fanxian's ancestors were the Emperor's ancestors. Cursing the Overwatch Council that all scholars hated to the bone was fine, but cursing the Emperor's 18 generations of ancestors? Everyone just wanted to vent the anger of the old Ming matriarch, who had died an unjust death. They didn't want to throw their lives into it. Hua Garden was still silent. One could faintly see the flickering lights inside, and the sound of stringed instruments came through the rain. The soldiers of the governor's manor were on standby. They lit torches in their hands and lit up the outside of Hua Garden. The rain was like a thread and had long soaked the bodies of the students still outside Hua Garden. They looked at each other and wiped the rain off their faces, not daring to believe their own ears. Suzhou was already like this. They were already like this, yet the imperial envoy still had the leisure to do this, like this. They were drenched in the rain, yet the imperial envoy was listening to a play. The students strangely became angry. The angry cursing that had just stopped due to exhaustion rang out again. Amidst the angry cursing, a person wearing a gray, unlined garment was sandwiched in the crowd. His eyes rolled around a few times. He took out something from his clothes and threw it into Hua Garden. The item fell into the garden and only made a muffled sound. There was no sound of an explosion. Instead, a thunderous curse came from Hua Garden. Who the F***CK is throwing a bag of dog blood? Throwing dog blood was one of the most insulting tricks. Although it was childish like a child throwing a tantrum, throwing it into the imperial envoy's Hua Garden was a big deal. The students were also stunned, and the cursing stopped for a moment. They thought to themselves, which classmate is this? How could he be so daring? Just as they were thinking this, 3 black shadows flashed across Hua Garden. It was 3 swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. They watched the troublemakers on the street outside the garden coldly. The crowd fell silent for a moment. Suddenly, someone exploded with a cry. The Overwatch Council is going to kill people. A shadow charged into the crowd. The sound of fanning the flames suddenly stopped. It was like someone had grabbed the throat of a duck's fate. The crowd was startled and parted in the middle. A large man wearing cotton clothing walked out coldly with a gray-clothed person's throat in his hand. The large man wearing cotton clothing was the leader of the Tiger Guards, Gao Da. He had been watching the people fanning the flames on Fan Xian's orders. Given his ability, it was easy for him to take the person. He threw the gray-clothed man to the ground and stepped on his chest. The sound of the man's sternum breaking could be heard. The students looked at this wretched scene. Hot blood rushed to their heads. They surrounded Gouda in the middle and yelled, "Murder! The Overwatch Council is killing people." This scene scared the surrounding officials of the governor's manor. They urged their horses forward, ready to send troops to suppress the situation at any moment. Gouda coldly picked up the gray-clothed man and shook him like he was shaking a sack. Clink, clink, clink. Who knew how many things fell from the man's body? First, he didn't die. The gray-clothed man's moan answered Gouda's words. The student's emotions calmed slightly. Gouda coldly said, "Second, you are here to seek justice. This person is here to tempt the Imperial envoy to kill you. There is a difference, there is a difference in treatment." These are his original words. Only now did the students come to their senses. Looking down, they couldn't help but jump in fright. They saw that there were not only bags of dog blood on the gray-clothed man's body. There were also fire seeds and lamp oil. Only now did everyone understand that if they allowed this person to do bad things in the crowd and actually burn down Hua Garden, where the prince and imperial envoy lived, they would certainly be killed on the spot by the court as thugs. His original words are two, Gouda said coldly. Everyone was intimidated by his imposing manner and listened obediently. If there is injustice in your chest, you have to vent it. This is the nature of young people. I don't blame you. Gouda continued to narrate Fan Xian's words. But to be incited by someone and not know the truth, how stupid is that? If there is injustice you want to vent, you have to find the right way. To make such a racket like a shrew in the marketplace is truly shameful. Listening to these words, the students felt very dissatisfied. A student who seemed to be the leader stood out boldly. The Overwatch Council handles matters unfairly, forcing people to die. I once went to the Suzhou government to make a report, but officials protect each other. Furthermore, the Suzhou government fears the power of the Overwatch Council and it does not accept the complaint. Dare I ask the Imperial Envoy, what other way can I vent my anger? Gouda glanced at that person coldly. Sir, since you have the courage to gather outside the garden to make trouble, do you have the courage to enter the garden to discuss matters? The students immediately began to make a ruckus. Some said they couldn't enter, others said they had to enter. There were many different opinions. In the end, they all focused their gazes on the student who had stood out earlier. This student was a student of Jiangnan Road's White Deer Academy. His name was Fong Tingshi. He came from a poor background, but was very knowledgeable. He had always been deeply admired by his peers and was the hidden leader of the students. Fong Tingshi thought for a moment and gritted his teeth. From his clothes, he took out the letters of blood from tens of thousands of people he had collected. Raising them above his head, he said, I am willing to enter the garden to debate with you. Gouda glanced at him expressionlessly. Carrying the gray-clothed man, he walked into the garden. Fong Tingshi felt slightly uneasy. Summoning up his courage, he walked in. At the same time, he dissuaded his fellow students' requests to enter together. Fan Xian sat in the grand wooden armchair with his eyes half closed, enjoying Cece's gentle massage behind him. His fingers tapped on the table, along with the singing of the melodious master in the pavilion in the garden. Below him, the incomparably daring Fong Tingshi, who had entered the garden alone to ask for justice from the imperial envoy, was flipping through something. His face alternated between green and white. His lips trembled slightly. It was as if he was shocked by what was recorded on it. Fan Xian slowly opened his eyes and said, This is a court secret. However, there are many things that are not convenient to bring to the Suzhou government as evidence. There are many things that are already dead and cannot be used as evidence. There are many things that involve nobles in court. I cannot use them as a cover to openly destroy the Ming Garden. However, since you have the courage to pull together a group of students to seek justice, presumably you are not an idiot. After seeing so many things, you should have your own independent judgment as to what exactly happened in the Ming Garden matter. What Fong Tingsher held in his hands were the results of the Overwatch Council's secret investigation of the Ming Garden this half-year. It included the pirates on the East Sea Island, the strange death of Ming Launcher's concubine, the story of Xia Qifei and the Ming family, the Ming family smuggling to Dongyi, and the A Sigajian left to enter Jiangnan to assassinate Fan Xian. Each stroke was recorded clearly. Although, as Fan Xian had said, these records could not be presented as evidence because of the lack of circumstantial evidence. Fong Tingsher knew that what was written on it was all true. His hands holding the files were trembling. But it shouldn't be like this. The old Ming matriarch has softened Jiangnan and supported countless poor students. My family has been poor since I was young. If it wasn't for the Ming Garden giving me rice every month to study, how could I have entered White Deer Academy? His eyes were slightly red. He stared angrily at Fan Xian and said, "Imperial Envoy, since I dared to enter the garden today, I did not have any thoughts of leaving alive. I did not believe the things recorded here. The Overwatch Council is best at framing people." Fan Xian looked at him coldly and did not continue. Fong Tingsher himself could not continue. "Ever since I took over the Overwatch Council, when has there been a case of framing people and framing people?" Fan Xian said mockingly. "As for you, as a student, you should have the ability to make independent judgments. You don't need to rely on other people's words or your own eyes. You only need to look at the situation these years and your own brain." "Of course, you all have no brains to begin with," Fan Xian scolded. "If you all had brains, you wouldn't have been persuaded by others to come to Hua Garden. Where's this? This is the Imperial Envoy's residence. This is the Prince's temporary Imperial residence. Even if I cut off 300 of your heads, there would be no problem. In the end, it will be you all who die, and my reputation will also be gone. It will be good for those shady and illegal merchants who bend the law." He was angry and unkind. Pointing at Fong Tingshi's nose, he scolded, "You are all a bunch of idiots. I don't know where all your years of studying went." His anger was faked because Fan Xian knew that these students would fall for it the most. As expected, Fong Tingsher mumbled, "The Imperial Envoy's teaching is correct." He changed his mind. Not only had the Imperial Envoy not taken action to suppress the students, but he had also invited him into the manor. His heart was indeed sincere. He opened his mouth with a pained smile and said, "Sir is magnanimous." Fan Xian closed his eyes and shook his head. "My magnanimity cannot be said to be magnanimous. It is just that you're all still young. I'm not willing to use those methods as to why I can tolerate you today." Chapter 400. So high-spirited, Fan Xian had one foot on the railing of the top floor of the Suzhou branch of Baiwa Brothel. He held a fan in his other hand and fanned himself. The cold rain at the end of spring had stopped. The summer heat had gone and returned. In an instant, the temperature in the air rose. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the funeral procession passing through the main street. He listened to the babbling of morning music and couldn't resist smiling. Ming Qingdao indeed had a way. On the surface, he appeared mournful, angry, and absolutely irreconcilable with Fan Xian. He had actually allowed the old Ming matriarch's burial ceremony to pass through the city. It was very ostentatious along the way. Along the way, there were citizens who had set up small tables and placed fruits in worship. There were also some beggars who had received benefits who were kowtowing to the slowly moving coffin. The sound of morning music was actually sometimes pleasant to listen to, at least in Fan Xian's ears. He waved his fan and couldn't resist sighing again. So high-spirited, the wind blew through the fan. He couldn't be bothered to fight with Ming Garden over their pride. He did not find it exciting to use a dead person to obstruct his eyes. If they wanted to parade, then go ahead. In any case, it wouldn't do him any real harm. After sweeping away the sixth Ming disciple and the old matriarch's trusted aides, Ming Qingda had already gradually and steadily controlled the situation in Ming Garden. It was also under his powerful suppression that the tens of thousands of Ming family members did not let out a final roar of mutual destruction because of the old Ming matriarch's unusual death. The scholars who had been clamoring in Suzhou a few days ago had been split apart by Fan Xian and then educated with a rod. Without the support of the Ming family, their momentum immediately weakened. Just as Fan Xian had expected, the so-called righteous indignation could not last long. Of course, Fan Xian knew that if he wanted to suppress the voices of revenge within the Ming family, it would certainly be hard on Ming Qingda. However, this matter had been caused by Ming Qingda. If he didn't want Fan Xian to fly into a rage, he had to swallow all this hard work, difficulty, and anger. What truly made Fan Xian happy was that the crows scattered among the crowd a few days ago had already sent back news. He didn't know if it was because of the Ming family's sudden silence that the elders of the Juanshan Conference had no time to react. At least in the Jiangnan area, some of the officials of the Juanshan Conference had made some rather stupid responses, such as inciting the citizens to cause trouble. Relying on the Overwatch Council's secret investigation in this matter, and the people Ming Qingda had secretly sold to Hua Garden, the Overwatch Council had already set their sights on a manor downstream of the Yangtze River. It was a stronghold the Juanshan Conference had set up in Jiangnan. Perhaps it was just an unremarkable manor and was not very important to the Juanshan Conference, but Fan Xian needed to get rid of it to express his stance. While he was in Jiangnan, the Juanshan Conference had better behave for the time being. If you don't behave, I'll shut you up. The Black Knights could not enter Ming Garden because the Emperor did not like to see the Overwatch Council's martial power overly involved in local government affairs. However, for such a mysterious organization as the Juanshan Conference that even faintly resisted imperial power, the Qing Emperor probably did not care what methods Fan Xian used. Governor Shui Qing of Jiangnan Road also did not oppose Fan Xian's plan. After all, there was not enough time to ask Jingdou. Today was the day the old Ming matriarch was being buried. It was also the day the 500 Black Knights stealthily crossed the Yangtze River to wash a certain place in blood. The funeral procession had already passed through the long street under the Baiwa brothel. Fan Xian noticed that a few nobles had already carefully backed out of the procession. These Jiangnan people did not want to offend the Ming family, but they also did not want to give the imperial envoy too much face. Thus, they sent the procession to the city gates and turned back on their own. So high-spirited and vigorous, with great power in hand, what need was there to fear the hearts of the people? Although Fan Xian did not get carried away, he had begun to feel in the depths of his heart that power was truly like a drug. No wonder Shizha had a saying. Xiaolong had paraphrased it, and it was commonly seen on the forums. Absolute so-and-so brought absolute so-and-so. However, Fan Xian knew that he did not need to be corrupt. He thought without shame that his mental realm was still relatively high, so he couldn't resist sighing for the third time. In the story, there should be someone asking, "Sir, it was a pity that Wang Qinian still had another half a year before he could return to the Qin kingdom." Beside him, Deng Ziyu deliberated for a long time with a strange expression before choking out, "Sir, seems to be in a good mood." Fan Xian smiled and spat. "Of course I'm in a good mood. This old woman died cleanly, standing on a tall building and watching others into the grave. How could I not be happy?" Deng Ziyu thought to himself, what was there to be happy about? He couldn't resist opening his mouth to admonish, "Jiangnan people." He only said 3 words before Fan Xian stopped him and smiled coldly. "Don't repeat those words. What people's hearts and public opinion? In a few months, these people will completely forget. What benevolence, what benefits, they can only remember for a few days. In the end, it cannot compare to the fact that there is no oil to cook at home, no rice to cook at home. These things are important." Common people are the most forgetful people in the world. His words had a point, and it was pointing to Fan Xian's past, the Yi family that had long been weathered by wind and rain and turned into the palace treasury of the royal court. Back then, compared to the Ming family of today, the Yi family was 10 times more glorious 10 times more powerful and 10 times more benevolent toward the people. Heaven changed its face in one day, and the family was broken and people died. The tens of thousands of people under heaven all kept quiet out of fear. Who dare to seek justice for the Yi family? Deng Ziyu was startled and silent. He knew he had touched on the commissioner's years of pain, so he didn't say anything more. He finally understood why the commissioner would always smile coldly and not care about the people's hearts each time he mentioned them. As officials, we are only the emperor's officials, not the people's officials. Fan Xian's words were the complete opposite of serving the people. With the situation having reached this point, what was there for Fan Xian to be dissatisfied with? The Ming family was the monkey in the palm of his hand. Jiangnan was certain. Xia Qifei had already sent back news from Jiangbei. A few days ago, he had hooked up with his second brother's side. The storm in the Ministry of Revenue in the capital had settled. There was an urgent need to gather herbs in Hangzhou. The 3 large workshops in the palace treasury were in full swing. Under the gaze of the Qingyu Hall shopkeeper, they were serious and lively. As for officialdom, Fan Xian's relationship with Xue Qing was growing closer and closer. In the palace, the emperor's trust in him had not decreased. Particularly after the Ming family matter, Fan Xian had damaged his own reputation. Without question, it increased the emperor's pity for his illegitimate child who was willing to be alone. Looking left and right, it was all a situation of great victory for him. As for the Juanshan conference, a cold smile flashed across the corner of Fan Xian's lips. He didn't know what the old cripple in Qin Garden outside the capital was thinking. In any case, Fan Xian did not plan on delving too deeply into this matter. The so-called raising a tiger was like this. To completely wipe out the Juanshan conference, first of all, this was a very difficult task. Even if Fan Xian went wild and risked losing most of the power in his hands, he still might not be able to accomplish this. Just looking at how the incomparably powerful second priest of the Qing Temple, Great Master Sanshi, was only a pawn thrown out by the Juanshan conference, one could imagine how much terrifying power was hidden in this nominally loose organization. Even if, with the help of his father and the old cripple, the whole family put their lives on the line and successfully overturned the Juanshan conference, Jiangnan would be settled, and the monarch's power was stable. The emperor would not allow Fan Xian to lead troops in a battle. Then what else could Fan Xian do? At such a young age, would he stay in that dark and gloomy room in the Overwatch Council and retire? Fan Xian did not want to become a second Qin Pingping, so he would not rush to resolve and extinguish certain conflicts. On the contrary, he hoped that these conflicts would slowly blossom in a situation he could control like a poisonous flower. Of course, he did not think that today, in the Baoyu brothel, his thoughts and the old cripple's thoughts were actually the same. The old and the young were both working hard in secret for a goal that could not be announced. The only regret was that these two people did not seem to be willing to communicate with each other. Perhaps they did not want to implicate each other. Not delving into the Juanshan conference did not mean they wouldn't deal with it. The Juanshan conference had tricked Fan Xian a few times in Jiangnan. He had to settle this debt. At this moment, the Black Knights were advancing silently on the mountain path. After a few months of planning, the only small hole was the Juanshan conference accountant, Mr. Zhou. This person had not been silenced. Furthermore, under the surveillance of both Ming, Qingda, and himself, he was still able to escape without a sound. This meant that this person was certainly an important character in the Juanshan conference. Perhaps he knew the true inside story of the Juanshan conference. However, Haidang still had not returned. A faint worry rose between Fan Xian's brows. Mr. Zhou must be under the protection of a very powerful figure. He left the railing and sat back down at the table. He ordered Deng Ziyu, contact the governor's manor and send out a wanted poster. His voice was very low. The Ming family has already sent someone to deliver housekeeper Zhou's portrait. Give it to the governor's manor and have both sides investigate together. Deng Ziyu shivered. He knew that Sir Zhou did not have any good ideas, so he could only begin to use the power of the government to try and force them in the open. As for that portrait, He knew that it was drawn by the old Ming matriarch's personal serving girl. Fan Xian sighed and said, "If we can capture that Mr. Zhou alive, don't you think this matter would be a bit too wonderful?" It is indeed a wonderful thought. The top floor of Baoyue brothel was empty. Only Fan Xian's table had people sitting at it. At this moment, on the other side of the railing, at that table, 2 more people suddenly appeared. Furthermore, they followed up Fan Xian's words with extreme coldness. Countless sounds of metal being unsheathed rang out in the top floor. It was very severe. With Gouda in the lead, the 7 tiger guards gripped their strangely shaped long knives tightly in their hands and formed the shape of a mountain, firmly protecting Fan Xian behind them. What Juanshan conference? He didn't have time to worry about it. As long as he could kill the person in front of him, Fan Xian felt that anything was worth it. High-spirited? A bitter smile appeared at the corner of his lips. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.